Based on
the
that.
state based on that. Now, it wouldn't, you just can't say we're gonna hire an ABA tech, but we would have.
Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you and welcome to the regular meeting of the school committee of May 6, 2019. This is your reminder that this meeting is being electronically recorded. Start tonight with a public hearing pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 76, Section 12B, D, on the matter of school choice for the 2018-2019 school year. Is there anyone who would like to address the school committee regarding the matter of school choice?
Just a question. It says 2018-2019 school year, but
Should be 2019-2020.
2019-2020,
Yep,
should it not?
it should, thank you.
Okay.
Is there anyone who'd like to address the school committee on the matter of school choice for the 2019-2020 school year? All right, we'll leave the public hearing open for a few minutes in case anyone comes forward. right, seeing nobody that is asking to address the school committee at public hearing on the matter of school choice, I will close the public hearing at 6:50 PM. Moving on to our general business agenda for tonight, and that starts with our spotlight events. I'll turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Regan.
Thank you, Chairman Withers. So we have two spotlight presentations this evening. Our first one is highlighting the travel experiences that our students in middle school and high school have had already this spring. So first, I'd like to introduce Ms. Doreen Baracco up to the table to start off the presentation.
Very good.
Welcome.
Am I advancing the slides?
Yes.
All right. Okay, very good. All right. So, hi, I'm Doreen Baracco. I'm Brennan Middle School Social Studies 7th grade teacher. I think back in 2016 or so, I developed the idea. It was kind of along the lines of what was going on already in the district with really creating a robust travel program. I threw my hat in and I wanted to develop a travel program, an international travel program for the middle school, something that would align nicely with the social studies curriculum. And we've done just that. This past April, 39 travelers did the grand tour of Italy. So our students, just from the 7th grade curriculum alone, they saw the Colosseum, the Roman Forum, Pompeii, and that's just in chapter 11 of their textbook. They also got a preview of what's coming up in the 8th grade curriculum. They saw the birthplace of the Renaissance in Florence, as well as the shipping powerhouse, so the economic powerhouse in northern Italy of Venice. So they really made these connections with their social studies curriculum, which was the intent. Here, I'm like talking and I should show you. This first slide, this was our inaugural travel.
Sorry to interrupt.
So this was our first foray into international travel with our middle schoolers, and it was just a resounding success right from the very beginning. We wanted to touch, the classical cultures, so we visited a number of sites in Italy, and then we moved on to Greece, where again it was such a nice complimentary tour of the 7th grade curriculum, and parents were smitten with it as well. So what's unique about the middle school program is that both parents and students can travel, so they got to experience it together. And I just included a couple of quotes. We have a Facebook page where family, friends, and others alike can follow along. So that was our inaugural trip. Then we did England and Scotland the second year, and the third year.
It takes a minute. Here it is.
Sorry, all right. It was just a brilliant trip, and everyone enjoyed themselves. So it was really a rejuvenation, not only for the students and for family, but also for teachers. One of my chaperones was the art teacher from Brennan Middle School, and I just really wanted to show some of her work, and it's great because this is going to make it into her classroom with her students as well. So it was just a win-win situation for educators, students, and families alike. So my family's having a right. I do have a couple of chaperones who are here. Maggie Everhart, who is the ELA teacher, and Missy Mandeville, the 8th grade social studies teacher, as well as Tracy Corneville, the art teacher from the middle school. So anyway, if you are interested in seeing or following our adventures, that is the Facebook page, the Attleboro Middle School International Travel Program. I have a student hero who I think got the travel bug from traveling with me. I don't know how much traveling went on in the Larson family, but she got the South Pacific, right? I mean, who does that? She does that.
Ms. Sawyer, do you have a question?
I just want to say my family went on the tour of Italy and they absolutely loved it. They said that pictures don't do it justice.
It's true. It's true. Okay.
Mr. Domenici?
I do. I had a question. So 39 went this year. How many is it open to? Like, how many slots are do we
Well,
allow?
it's usually based on the number of people that they can get in a coach bus. So it's mid-40s or so is usually the max. So,
Okay.
I mean, we could then fill another bus, but it's middle school. So, and we're such a new program, so we're not there yet. I think the high school teachers.
And I guess as a follow-up, was this the highest number
Yes.
of students? So it's been increasing
Yeah.
with each year?
Yeah. And Italy's a big seller. I mean, they just love Italy. So, and we've got France next year and Spain and Portugal the following year. So, people love them. So.
Mr. Klein?
I think these experiences are absolutely wonderful. I think what's been done to increase this at the middle school and the high school is emblematic of the vision laid out with the strategic plan. I could see the emotion on your face, Mrs. Sawyer. That was really kind of an awesome moment. I think one thing I am also mindful of and just would request is that we just keep an eye towards equity. I know these are really excellent experiences, and whatever we can do to make sure that it's not just a financial piece that keeps those from experiencing that would be fantastic. So keep up the great work. I look forward to seeing the growth and development.
Very good.
I believe next in the slide deck is Miss Angela Larson and her trip. Miss Mandeville, sorry. She just went to check. Okay, we can move. We can slide. We can move forward.
All right, so I'm Angela Larson from Attleboro High School. I teach science. This is Julia Willis. She came on my trip this year. She's a junior. So we went in February to Costa Rica, and we actually started on the Pacific coast of Costa Rica, went through the deserts, up through the tropical rainforest, to the cloud forest, and then back to the Caribbean coast. And for our 7 days there, kids learned about all the different biomes, our 15 microbiomes of Costa Rica, and how to sustain an entire country on renewable energy, which was really kind of interesting. And while we were there, we got to actually hike down to the bottom of a waterfall and swim at the bottom of a waterfall. And then we hiked up a volcano on the same day. It was a little bit tiring. The kids got to zip line through the canopy. They got to see all kinds of creatures that are not native to where we live. Right, Julia?
Yeah.
So the kids got to see all kinds of views. And then they also took classes in cooking, soap making, pottery, natural dyes. That's Arenal Volcano. We hiked to the highest point that they allow visitors at. And then on our last night we had a nice dinner.
So this was probably one of the most fun experiences of my life, because it was really diverse in the way that we got to go as a student-led group with lovely Miss Larson. And it just really taught you like the differences between different cultures and just how to get along with others on a trip too. It was a lot of valuable lessons that I think would not have been learned if I didn't go.
Yep. We were a small group. We only had 12 of us total, 10 students and 2 adults.
So my question is for you, what was your biggest, I mean, you just explained about how to coexist, but what was something new to you as part of your experience?
I mean, do you mean my experience with like the people on the trip?
Well, probably more something about Costa Rica,
So,
something new as part of that experience.
okay, so on the trip, we just learned a lot about like the different culture, and I actually used Spanish, which was kind of fun to like see that come from the classroom and put that into like a real life situation. And just like the music and the views, it all just clicked together.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Mrs. Johnson?
Thank you. So I want to commend you on finding a international trip that was also science-based. I think traveling and learning about other cultures is such a wonderful thing to do. And it's usually focused on culture and the arts and history, which is definitely very important. But as we move forward in the sciences, I have observed it becoming more and more collaborative, intercultural, lots of international collaborations. So the fact that you're able to start this, this type of planting the seed at this level in incorporating science, I think is just really wonderful. So very well done. Thank you. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, we can slide it back.
Yeah, I ran out just at the right time last time. Looking for the kids to, two kids were supposed to come today and help with this. So I run the Washington DC trip. This is the third year. This is the third year. This will be the fourth year that we are currently running. This year that year I took 85 kids approximately. Next year I already have all 85 spots filled. So I'm looking to probably open up a third bus and take up to like 120 because it's getting pretty popular as we go on. It's a 4-day, 3-night trip. We leave on a Wednesday, return on a Saturday. We go through everything. We go to Mount Vernon. We do the Capitol building. We make these T-shirts for the group. That's the White House. Last year we didn't get a picture at the White House. We were escorted off as soon as we arrived. So that was from the year before, security reasons, and they couldn't tell us why. And then we go to Arlington National Cemetery, Lincoln Memorial, World War II museums. There's Miss Everhart pointing to, we get a tour, the tour guide gives us names of Attleboro veterans who have served in Vietnam, and then we have to find their name on the plaque, and we write them a thank you letter, and we leave it by their name. So that's one of the ones we did a few years ago. And that's our tour guide's guy. And that's it. Any question? I had 2 students going to speak about their experiences, but they're not here yet.
So is it open to all students in 8th grade?
All 3 middle schools, yeah.
Okay. And is it first come, first serve?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs?
Yeah, I just want to say, I remember a few years ago talking about the Washington trip and how sad it was that it had gone away. So it's
Yeah.
a great thing to see that it's back in a few years in a row now. So just that's a wonderful thing. So thank you.
It's a good experience.
Thank you.
No, okay.
Okay, and I think the final trip that we'll be highlighting this evening will be Mr. Pereira's trip.
Good evening. Peter Pereira, the Attleboro High School World Language Department Coordinator. As you are aware, the World Language has been doing these trips since 1972. We've gone every single year except one. That was the year of the volcano and the ash, which happened a few days before we left. A lot of kids were disappointed. We have the department has taken almost 3,000 Attleboro High School students to Europe. It's always been popular. There were years when we had some of the wars that there were a few kids, but we still got to go. Last year, because there were so many kids that wanted to go, for the first time we took 2 buses, which is 100 people. It was manageable, but we'll not do that again. This year's trip was full. Next year's trip is already full. So again, it's been very popular. We've been doing it because obviously teaching languages, and not only do we teach the language, we teach the culture, and being there, there's absolutely nothing like it. Why do I keep doing it? My first year was 1980, and I've gone every year. I do it because I see what the results are with these students, the education that they get, how excited they are to be there, how they use the languages in these countries. But not even using the language, just being there is an experience. I believe it's valuable. As, 2 or 3 years ago, when you voted to do this, I sent you all a letter, how excited I was that, the school committee was, again, sponsoring, or, not sponsoring, but, let us doing these trips. So I want Jen, again, Jen has gone, she went with the middle school and a couple of times with the high school, so I would like her to talk about her experience.
So last year I was part of the trip with the 100 kids, and that one was a little crazy, but it was a ton of fun. We went to Italy, France, and Spain, so it was tropical and warm and beautiful. This year it was a little colder, a little rainier, but we went to Ireland, Scotland, and London, and it was incredible. I got to not only see places that I've never been before, but a lot of people that went on the trip, it was all seniors, and some of them I hadn't talked to since middle school or freshman year, just because you don't have classes with people. And so got to reconnect with people that I knew from home, but then also meet the local guides and everyone over in a different country. So it's incredible. I definitely recommend it to anyone.
I had another student come in today, Jack O'Donnell, but the tennis team is being held up because they're going late. As you can see, these are some of the chaperones that went last year. Some of these people have been going for over 10 years. So it's a good group. They're great with the kids. And here we have Miss Silva, who's gone the last couple of years. So I want her to talk about her experience a little bit.
Sure. Just personally, I'm interested. I got the travel bug very, very quickly myself, and getting the opportunity to share that experience with students is unparalleled. One, it allows for this really authentic experience that can't be confined to a classroom. But one of the things that I've begun doing the last couple of years, personally, but also within the trip that Mr. Pereira organizes, is bringing back a lot of material through video and photography and creating virtual field trips for my classroom. So, for example, this most recent trip, I thought ahead about the fact that I teach Robert Louis Stevenson, and we began in Edinburgh. And we didn't begin in Edinburgh, but we ended up at one point in Edinburgh, which is the birthplace of Robert Louis Stevenson. So over the course of our tour around the city and getting anecdotes from the tour guide, I was able to do some informal interviewing, taking notes myself, photographs, and bringing back some of the video material, so that even if I don't have the opportunity to bring these particular students that I'm working with to these cities, I can present the material in a way that's through multimedia, through 21st century approaches, so that they can feel like they're in the experience that I had, or that Ms. Marshall spoke of. It's one of those opportunities where you don't feel confined by the walls of the classroom you're in. You're only limited by the limitations of your own imagination and what kind of things you can create, and where you can bring your students. So you don't have to be boggled down by some of the things that are very realistic, such as socioeconomic constraints or financial constraints and budgetary things. We can bring them anywhere around the world and have really authentic experiences that lend themselves to, I think, really important conversations that we have each day in our classroom. Plus, it's just a great opportunity to take a vacation and to have these conversations. I mean, we had really great conversations just on the London subway, because we're stuck in the London subway, and and you're getting opportunities to interact with students that you may not have in the classroom. But when you come home and you see them in their sweatshirts and with their the items that they have, and you remember that conversation you had over dinner, or you remember that pastry or 2 or 3 pastries that you had sitting in that bakery, it really is a unique experience that I personally, having done this for 15 years, can't replicate, no matter how hard I try in the classroom. So if you can't tell, I'm very excited about traveling, and I love the opportunity to share it with students.
And she did get interesting items. We were in Toledo, and she got a sword made in Toledo, which is the place to get a sword. And this year she got a kilt in Scotland. That was an island, one of those.
One of those.
So, so we have some pictures. That's our group. We're in Parnell Square in Dublin.
It was cold, but fun.
As you will see that the first 2 days they were having a Siberian cold, so it was very cold. But towards the end of the week, it got to be very nice.
We got very lucky.
Yeah, so here we are in Ireland, and this is the real St. Patrick's Cathedral in Dublin.
to be there for the tolling of the bells, and for
Yeah.
a positive thing, and nothing
Yeah.
like that's right. The long
And
room.
this is the, at Trinity College, which is, you know, the #1 college in Ireland. This is their library, which is amazing with the volumes they have from centuries, you know, books that go back 800 and 1,000 years. So it's quite magnificent. And then we went to Northern Ireland. For years, I wanted to go to Northern Ireland, because, you know, when in the 70s and 80s, you all remember all the bombings that were taking place in the, they don't call it the war, they call it
The Troubles.
the Troubles. And, but, you know, the Trouble's been over for 20 years, but the wall is still up, and there is a gate to the city that goes up at night. So, you know, the kids learned a lot of history, especially when we were here in Northern Ireland, because the guides were very good. So they learned quite a bit of the history that was going on, and the peace process, and everything that's going on. And the wall, we got to write messages on the walls. So we all got out of the bus and we wrote a message there for their peace. So, you know, you know, people are fantastic. Both our guides, which is great. They had lived through all of that, so the explanations were, you know, great. And, you know, these are the wall that, you know, it's a big wall. It's not a little wall. It goes on and on. So we got to write messages, which they want people to do. And here we are, we're in Derry, or Londonderry. It's a city that has two names. If you're a Catholic, it's Derry. If you're a Protestant, it's Londonderry. So and it's still there. But our guide was actually quite good. He knew his stuff, and I kept listening to him, and he was so careful at every word he said. He did not want to say the wrong thing. And here we are at Giant's Causeway. Those are rocks that you look at them, it's like these were man-made. They have to be. How can nature do this? It's hexagons. They're all in hexagon shape, so it's quite amazing. So we got to go there and find this big mountain. Well, the kids did. I didn't. It was high. I don't do heights. Here we are in. We went to Scotland, and this is our whole group. We had 49 in the group, and that's the Castle of Edinburgh. As you can see, the weather's getting a little bit better. And now here in London, you can see the weather it was very nice. The weather was fantastic by the time we got to London, you can see. So here's the group in London. And we went to Buckingham. There's a statue of Churchill, and the Tower Bridge here with all the background of all the students. And there's a video there.
There is, is it a video?
I don't
You click
Is
on
it?
on the mouse.
This is Eli.
There you go. Well, there were about 4 or 5 of them that brought the bagpipes, and they were practicing. It's not easy. So nothing like, you know, this gentleman can play. So that was our trip. A lot of fun, historical, a fantastic experience for the kids. You want any questions?
Any questions or comments? Mr. Larson?
I don't have a question, I just have a comment. I mean, I think anytime we get the kids out of the classroom, I think it's fantastic. And to all the educators who have taken our children overseas on these trips, thank you seems to be a very small sentiment, but it means a lot. So thank you.
Mr. Quinn?
So I thought the idea of virtual field trips, particularly created ones by you or even students within the district, is a really innovative idea of bringing the trip back to those who are still here. Along similar lines, you know, I know that Brexit is like a current topic in the news. Did you get a chance to talk to any of the locals, particularly in Ireland, about how the Brexit is impacting?
Every single day.
Yeah.
Every single day.
We had one teacher Miss Rosa. Every single person she met, she would ask him the questions, and they're all open about it, so we learned a lot from their answers. It is a problem because Northern Ireland especially, well, they're part of England, so if they separate, they're not happy with it because the European Union has been very good for them. They actually built them this beautiful bridge, it's called the Peace Bridge, that looks like a handshake. And it's the first time that there's a bridge between the Catholics and the Protestants. So they're having a dilemma. So they don't know if they should stay with England or join Ireland. So no, we asked a lot of questions, and all our guides, they would talk about it, the kids would ask. So yes, it's hands-on experience.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Mr. Geddes?
Yeah, I was going to ask something very similar. As Ms. Johnson pointed out, they're seeing that firsthand. It's not just about the art and the culture. It's also about, or the history. It's also about opportunities to learn about science. In this case, this is a major international news story that the students don't just have to watch on TV. That they can actually go talk to the locals about and hear firsthand opinions. So it's incredible. I don't think I can add to anything more to what's already been said.
No, some of the kids told me they had no idea what Brexit's about until these people were talking about it, and they were living it. So it's an unbelievable. It's the reason I do it. It changes kids' life. I mean, there's 3 or 4 kids who live in Europe now because of these trips. One of them is my own niece. She went on one of these. She loved Italy. She said, when I finish school, I'm going to go back and live there. Well, she did. That was 15 years ago. She has never come home. And last year we were in Florence, and 2 students from Attleboro, Ohio, who had done these, were going to school in Florence. Which, our kids like, wow, this is incredible. So it brings our kids to the world. There is a world out there other than Attleboro, and it is fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sure we can all relate to this. As parents, we're usually driving children around and dropping people off and picking them up after school hours to their different activities. And so we had 2 parents that came after Ms. Baracco presented about the middle school presentation. If I could just have them come up and just say a few words about the middle school presentation.
Hello, welcome.
Hi. My name is Lizette Lofton. I actually did both trips, 2 trips. The first one was 2 years ago with my 8th grader. We did Italy and Greece. And then this year I did a tour of Italy with my 7th grader. And my 8th grader also did the Washington trip, so he's kind of been going around. So the opportunity that the schools have been given the middle school students to go and do these international trips has been a great benefit, I think, to both of my boys. I see it more on my 8th grader. Well, he's a sophomore now in high school, where he's become he's outspoken, a little bit more interested in travel. We traveled before, and we did a lot of stateside travel. He's really interested in traveling abroad now. So he's looking at what opportunities there are, even volunteerism, which surprised me, so through EF. So he's looking at that as well. I don't know, seeing the kids this year, there was kids from the Brennan Art Club, and just seeing what they learned in the class and talking about it, the knowledge that they also brought, and they gave the tour guys a run for their money in the questions they were asking. So it was good to see that, they're bringing what they've learned in the classroom out into these trips, and they're getting additional knowledge from, you know, the horse's mouth. They're seeing it firsthand, and they're experiencing what they've learned in the classroom. So, looking forward to more trips that may come, and opportunities that the middle schools may have, and, you know, of course, as they move on to high school, what they have available in the high school.
Yeah, I completely agree with Liz here. Our boys are actually the same age, and we went on these same exact trips that she went on together. And when I heard about the middle school travel program, I jumped on it. And at first, you know, parents weren't allowed, and I was still willing to let my child go because, you know, I read up on the EF tour company, and they do such a great job planning everything. You basically don't have to do anything except for show up at the airport, and they take care of the rest, which is great. But having been able to experience it with my sons, both my boys, has been amazing. And the way the kids from all three different schools who don't know each other, they get together, they bond, they make new friendships, and they're still, you know, group chatting now long after the trip's been over. So I think that's great. And then they'll meet up eventually in the high school, most likely. And my son's also a 10th grader now at Attleboro High, and he's definitely interested in the high school trips, especially the service trips, the one coming up for the Dominican Republic. And, you know, they've never been anywhere internationally until these trips came along. I've never been anywhere internationally until these trips came along. And it was just amazing experience for them. They've learned so much, being able to see it hands-on, you know, and how life is in other countries. So,
and thinking, you know, they're middle school kids. They may not be mature enough to attend. They are on time. It's funny because you see other kids from like other high schools, not from Attleboro, but from other places, countries, and our kids are so well behaved, and they pay attention to what the tour guide says, and they pay attention to what the teachers say. They follow their curfew, and they're out at the bus early, waiting to be out there and getting loaded up, and you know, so them showing how responsible they are, it was really good to see, and it was a big surprise because, at least for me, initially when the first trip, I was thinking, oh my God, middle school kids, they're gonna go crazy. We're gonna have to come, you know, run after them, and we don't. It's like they're so on target with what they're supposed to be doing, and you know, there was no issues with kids running off and scaling, you know, artifacts and whatnot, because you know, don't touch that, you might break it. They're very good. They take their pictures, they ask their questions, they're very courteous to people. So I was really happily impressed of their behavior and how they did compared to the French high school kids. But that's another story. But yeah, it was a great experience, and just seeing how mature they were for that age group was really a nice surprise.
Thank you so much. It looks like we have a couple students from the middle school Washington DC trip. So if you could just introduce yourself and tell us one thing that you would like to remember the most about your trip to DC.
I'm Joey. Feel free to have a seat. You don't have to kneel before the school committee.
I'm Joey. I went on the trip last year, but she already said that.
My name is Anthony Chen, and I also attended the Washington DC trip last year. I think one thing about the trip was that it was great on an educational side, but also it was a really good bonding experience for all the other kids. I was planning to go on the trip with, you know, my three other best friends, and they ended up not getting in, and so I was put with Joey and two other kids, and I was familiar with them, but you know, we weren't the best of friends, and I felt like the whole trip experience, you know, sharing a hotel room and getting to know them was a really good experience for that, and like it's definitely a memory that I'll take with me, you know, when I'm way older and all that.
I, like he said, it was, the other two kids I already knew. It was Ethan and Francis. They were both good friends of mine. But we needed a third person, and we couldn't find anybody. And then we saw you, and you didn't have anybody, so we're like, let's ask you. And now, I didn't really know you, but now we're friends. But, it wasn't like, there was so much that I learned on that trip, and so many people I met. Like, it was so much easier for me going from 8th grade to high school, because I already knew people. There were classes where I didn't know anybody from Brennan, but because of the DC trip, I had friends in there already that I could just talk to, and I wasn't awkward, or it was just easy.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. So that concludes our travel experiences spotlight presentation, and so for our second presentation, we will be highlighting Generation Citizen. And so for this one, I'd like to invite up Miss Donna Goldstein and Miss Brian Hodges and Miss Missy Mandeville for this presentation.
Here, you guys sit.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, everybody.
With here or here?
Use the clicker.
This one is here.
I think you want to go to the right.
No, to the right. Thank you. Okay, so we are here to talk a little bit tonight about our pilot program that we have begun this year in grades 8 and 12, and it is in response to a big change that we had in our history and social studies history and social science standards. I'm trying to get used to calling it social science instead of social studies. So the first question that we want to inform you a bit about is just what Generation Citizen is. So this is the pilot program that we used. Generation Citizen is a semester-long, standards-aligned, student-centered action civics curriculum, and it's designed to complement the new framework around civics learning. This year we piloted Generation Citizen, as I mentioned a moment ago, in grades 8 and 12 with plans to train additional staff next year. And in doing so, in implementing this pilot, we are responding to significant changes in the 2018 standards for history and social science. A little bit of background on these new standards so you can see the significance of a pilot like this. The new frameworks feature 3 important pillars. The first one is revised content that requires civics learning for all students. Another is the inclusion of practice standards that guide inquiry, research, and action. And the last pillar is content literacy. So all 3 of these strands are interwoven into this one framework. An additional change is that students are expected to experience civics. So much like the theme tonight about getting out and doing and having experiences, civics needs to be much more than just an abstract conceptual experience. Students need to do it. Grade 8 specifically is now a civics course. So part of why grade 8 is specifically part of the pilot. Generation Citizen, it's a program in which teachers learn how to facilitate inquiry, research, and advocacy, and along the way address the 3 pillars. It's framed by a graphic that they have here called the Advocacy Hourglass. And this guides students through an entire process. Students need to come to a consensus about an issue. They need to identify root causes. They need to set a goal, plan targets, and strategically determine tactics for action. So this is also a big challenge for a teacher too, because they really do need to stand back, know they've equipped students with skills, but students really need to be making lots of decisions with the teachers walking right by their side. And it's a real change because the students can kind of be like deer in the headlights sometimes. Everyone wants to be able to do until you're given the opportunity to do sometimes. And then what do you mean? How do we vote? How do we come to a consensus? We can't do that. So they're working through lots of processes, lots of complex processes. The student work culminates in a civics day And that's a presentation at the state level to community members, public officials, and other students. And as part of our learning this year, Brian, Missy, and I were judges at the Rhode Island Civics Day at the State House. It was in Providence, and it was in December. This was a hugely helpful way for us to take kind of a backwards design approach, because we got to see the end product. We got to be judges for students' civics projects, and it gave us a really clear sense of how this all comes together to realize the standards and realize the action civics part. Really how you help students realize civics learning. We'll also be attending the Massachusetts Civics Day in Boston at the State House on May 29th, along with some other teachers who we're scaling the program up with next year. The students pictured in the photo here in their poster presentation are from the Providence presentation in December. And you can, if you look closely, you can see components of the advocacy hourglass. What was really interesting here is because these students, you might not be able to, there was stacks of envelope, there was stacks of paper, they had documentation for every phone call, email, return correspondence, and it wasn't just one or two or three. These students worked exhaustively. They identified their big issue, they funneled it down to chronic absenteeism. Who do we contact? How do we get help? Bringing in lots of different community leaders, politicians. It was fascinating, the volume of work, and they had all of these artifacts to show all the ground they covered. This particular team, we were impressed with them there, and we found out a few days later that they were the top winners. This is the Juanita Sanchez High School in Providence, and they took top prize. And we got to be judges. We got to sit there and hear their presentation, ask them questions, and it was just really fascinating to see what these students are capable of doing. And again, when you learn how and students learn how, they learn how to take control, you learn how to guide and facilitate. We bandy those words around a lot, but it's a very nuanced skill to do that well. So it's a very exciting opportunity for all of us to learn about this. Brian and Missy are going to tell you lots more about how they've been doing this work with their students. I just wanted to give you a little bit of context for the program and its goals.
Thanks, Donna. So, I know Aiden's a regular here, but he's going to wear a second hat tonight because he's also in the course. Jen chose not to take it, which is, we worked through it. We're okay now. So, Missy and her students are really the star of tonight, so I think Aiden and I will try to be brief. We just wanted to give you a sense of what this is looking like at the 12th grade level as well, so you can kind of get the full picture. So, the class that we've piloted this in the high school is a senior elective. It's taught in an interdisciplinary way, so you can get credit for math, science, social studies, or English credits, sort of all rolled into one. It's called the 2030 Project. It's designed around the United Nations 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. So it's the second year that this course has been in existence. It's our first year piloting the Generation Citizen Action Civics curriculum through it. And so like Donna mentioned, we're going to be looking to scale this up with the new frameworks and standards. So they advocate for, and Missy and her class chose one specific issue. Because we're a year-long elective, we have a little more time, we took a bit of a different approach. We picked three. So with a little extra time, we figured we could bite off a little more. And so again, these are all student-driven. The students chose these, they came to consensus around these. So they started off with 20 or so. They all made pitches for the things that they cared about, and then we sort of coalesced around three broad topics. One was plastic pollution, one was climate change, and one was education reform. And so they've spent the majority of the school year working on a variety of activities around a variety of different things towards the goals that they've identified within those categories. And the advocacy hourglass, which Aiden's going to talk about in just a second, has sort of guided their work, right? So they arrived at these issues, they examined the root causes, they developed goals from there with specific targets and tactics. Ms. Regan and Mr. Sawyer have been on the business end of some of their emails, and
you guys are targets.
and pestering, so they know what it's like to be a target if you want to ask them. The one thing that I really wanted to emphasize, though, and the thing that I think is especially useful about this is the Generation Citizen model. And like we've been talking about Generation Citizen, this is a thing that we've been talking about in Attleboro for a while. Like we developed a mission statement, must have been 5 years ago now, that concludes with "Improve our world." Right, and so like this idea of action civics is sort of embedded in that very idea from when we sort of conceived of the Envisioning 2020 initiative. But it's this idea of systemic change, right? So like I chose that graphic to throw in the slide because it's really about trying to create it's a vision of citizenship that goes beyond participating. It's about leading, and it's about equipping students with the skills and providing them with the opportunity while they're still students with some guidance and support to be able to have these experiences so that when they go off into the world, they not only are able to, but they feel empowered to go about, making change in their communities at whatever level or, within whatever system they decide to. Hey, do you want to talk about your experience a little bit with your specific group?
Yeah. So, I guess to start, the biggest thing that I want to emphasize that when I took the class, I really didn't realize, I didn't know anything about Generation Citizen. But what I've understood it to be over the past school year, I guess, been taking it for so long now, is pretty much that Generation Citizen is largely just a framework, right? It's just a guideline, and it's so out of reach. And Mr. Hodges says this like almost every week that this is work that we're not used to doing, so it's okay to mess it up horribly. And the biggest piece of that is that, so I'm in charge of the education reform group. So our goal, we have a group of 10 kids that I lead, and we try to, reform education locally at the state level. But the biggest thing is that even if we were to fail miserably at that and make no progress whatsoever, as long as we, do it productively and we put a real effort in, we're still learning just as much. Whether we actually succeed our goal or not, whether we finish the race, it really doesn't matter because we tried. And the skills that we learn along the way are some of the most incredible things to see, because they're things you think would be so easy, like sending an email, but you really don't have to know how to send an email until you have to send an email, and you have to know like where to put the comma and like when to say thank you and stuff. And just to give some specifics, so our goal, education reform, so we have to first identify what we want to change, how we want to change it. So what are some of the causes? So like one of the causes that we decided were, just to pick one, would be that students, we try and get students in more representative positions in order to change their own ability to give their voice for what their education will be. Spots like me and Jen, and we've worked through different boards, the instructional leadership team here at AHS. Right now, like literally this past week and the week before, we've been working with teachers that are chairman of that board to get students to be represented. So next year there will be 3 students on that board. That won't be us. There will be 3 students that will interview this year, that will have to answer questions this year, that will be on the board next year. And that stuff, at the start of the year, it seems like you're not going to be able to make that kind of change. But I've sent emails to Ms. Regan. We've met Mr. Sawyer. There's been a lot of kind of trial and error along the way that have led to, small victories like this. And the things that you learn are things that you feel like you shouldn't have to learn, but you do. So we identified our goals, what we want to solve, how we want to go about solving it. We have to identify, I don't know if you remember that hourglass, who we should target, how we should target them, so figure out the people that are most involved in this, why they're a decision maker, and then also kind of make your plan of attack, like how we would want to pose a pitch. What we were calling it was a sales pitch. So like recently, one of my group members sent an email to Ms. Regan about getting some student reps on the labs, and pretty much we had to say, okay, well, what's our sales pitch? Like, why would she say yes to this, right? Why should they agree with us? And that's stuff that like we were like, okay, so what's our sales pitch? Let's start typing this email. Then we were like, okay, what is our sales pitch? Actually, we don't know what our sales pitch is, and we have to take a day and sit down as a group of 10 kids in a circle with no teacher in sight. Not in a bad way. Not in a bad way.
Go on.
Where are you hiding?
No, he's pretty much never there.
So we're gonna keep that out of this.
To pretty much sit and 10 kids, find a consensus on something is a beautiful thing that you don't find in a lot of classroom settings. And it's not just the goal that allows us to do that, but it's the framework. It comes back to teaching a kid how to be an involved human, teaches them skills on how to be a kind of a good person, how do we change the world, And there's so many things we've learned from it.
Yeah, just there's one last slide I wanted to show you. There's one sort of example that I thought would sort of codify this too. So these are pictures from the State House. We went in January. So this is an example of one of the ways that Generation Citizens helped sort of scale this up and make this a powerful thing. So one of the groups is focused on climate action. And so Generation Citizen, one of the things they do is they provide supports for us as teachers, and they'll connect us with organizations that are doing work that we can then bring to the students and say, like, would you want to get involved in this? So again, student chosen topic. We got an email from one of our Generation Citizen people that there'd be an opportunity to go to the State House and meet with legislators about some pending legislation coming up during this legislative session. There's some legislators that are introducing some carbon legislation, and we took them up on it. We got scheduled to meet with our state rep, Mr. Hawkins, our state senator, Paul Feeney, and so we went up there. We spent like 3 weeks prepping for this. We had to have everybody do a deep dive and sort of wrap their head around why climate change is happening and what the different proposals were, and do they support them, do they not support them, which version do they like more, which version do they like less. And so again, they were free to take whatever position they wanted to, but it gave them an opportunity to look at actual legislation, figure out where they stood on the issue, go to the State House and get an audience with their representative and senator, and they were actually able to persuade them to sign on and co-sponsor legislation. So I just thought it was a nice sort of like stock example of like focusing on an issue, identifying causes, but then working at like a governmental level to then enact to then work towards at least systemic change in that sense. Do you want to add anything in about Lobby Day?
Outside of a normal field trip setting, it was probably the most enriching field trip I've ever been on.
Leave it there.
All right.
Period. Yeah.
So I was piloting this with Brian. Brian has already done the 2030 project. This is completely new to me. I've been teaching world history for the past decade. So to come with civics, okay, let's give this a try. And I found the 8th graders, when we asked them like what's an issue in their community that they feel like needs to be addressed, they're going to have a harder time addressing issues in the community than a senior in high school. So we came up with racism, mental health, drugs and alcohol, and the longer lunch times. And we thought, okay, that's a little self-serving. And then at the end, I said, you know what? This is, we'll get to the project and the presentation later. I'm very proud of the work they've done. So in my in my drug and alcohol class, our goal was to bring a meaningful drug prevention program to the upper middle school and high school level. We reached out to Attleboro Police. We reached out to our state reps. We reached out to city councilors. All that. DARE, we reached out to the Substance Abuse Council here in Attleboro. We reached out to the mayor for that one. We also, for the racism group, we tried to create a task force on hate crimes in the Attleboro Police Department. We had Jim Hawkins, Ty Waterman, Ms. Parika all come in and speak to my class about that. We tried also to allocate more district funds to mental health, which we now have changed that to kind of doing, since the district funds is already kind of set, more just positivity, like helping the mental health in our school district. We're doing things like giving positive messages to people, secret acts of kindness in our school. We're doing things like that now. And increasing the lunch times. This class I have most of the time throughout the week during our lunch block. So the class is split. I have the class comes in and then they go to lunch and then they come back. And so while we were trying to pick a topic, they were like, these lunch times are not long enough, the 20 minutes. And that's where the idea came from. And so they're going to come up and speak to you about this. And they're the class also that I'm taking to the Civics Day. So this is the board we will be presenting. You get one poster board only. There's no media, there's no video, there's nothing electronic in your presentation. It just is an old school poster board. And they present for 10 minutes. They have 10 minutes to speak during the Civics Day presentation, and then the judges get to ask questions.
So we had longer lunches for our civics project. So for our first slide, we have for Action Civics, our class was put into 6 groups, each assigned the following tactics to work on. So we have conducting surveys, compiling research. We identified decision makers and influencers and sending out emails and making phone calls. Creating a social media presence, which these are some pictures from our APS Longer Lunches on Instagram. So we have a couple pictures of the kids working on different projects. And we have attracting press attention and holding a meeting, which is why we're here today.
Before beginning our project, we sent a survey out to students at Brennan that we created ourselves, and we collected the data from the results. And out of the 297 taken surveys, 292 people said they want longer lunches, and 92% of those surveyed said they had run out of time or were unable to finish their lunch. So with compiling research, with short lunch blocks, children consume significantly less entries, milk and veggies, and were also less likely to pick a piece of fruit, according to the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. Many children, especially those from low-income families, rely on school meals for up to half their daily energy intake, so it is essential that we give students a significant amount of time to eat their lunches. From Harvard School of Public Health.
So after all that, we made a lot of phone calls and sent a lot of emails to the decision makers and influencers, and some of our influencers were the schools. So we only have 20 minutes, but some schools go up to 35 to 26. And at St. John's Middle School, they have, at Foxborough Charter, sorry, they have 26 minutes and recess, and their days are still the same amount as ours. So as Sam said before, we also created social media and attracted press attention. So we started an Instagram account in April, gaining followers really quickly. The account has around 200 followers now, and this publicity attracted the Sun Chronicle. The Sun Chronicle made an article about us interviewing our classmates too. This further attracted WBZ Radio, who made a whole radio segment interviewing our classmates. And lastly, we got featured on the news, Fox News, where we were again interviewed and featured on TV.
So our last part of our civics project was to hold a meeting with a decision maker, which is what has brought us here today, to have a meeting with you. So we thank you for giving us the opportunity to present our project and listening to our proposal. Any questions?
Mr. Storrs?
So I'm going to advocate. So, Mr. Sawyer, how come we're not giving our kids enough time for lunch?
Well, as I explained to them in the email when they asked that very question, it's a pretty complicated thing, actually. And I, by the way, offered to meet to discuss all of that, but haven't been taken up on that offer yet.
He would definitely be a decision maker.
I think it's a really, having been a middle school teacher myself and having a very similar lunch, I think it's always an interesting question because I think it is a tight time crunch. I am curious about, have you collected any data about, now does a 20-minute start, does that include your walking time?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Have you collected any data on like what's the walking time? I see the data on asking, have you ever run out of time for lunch? I'm curious about like a couple other variables, like proximity. So what's the walking time? That would be really interesting data to me. Are there, is it possible that kids are stopping at their locker, or maybe there's some structural things that students could do to take time? So what are some of the variables that are cutting into that time? I also think what would be interesting too is how many, maybe it's one of those things where we should, if we have the time, go through and walk through a lunch just to see what happens.
That's a picture of the line.
Yep.
On Taco Day, which is Thursday, the busiest.
Yep.
Nacho Day. So the line goes all the way here. And it's probably about a 10-minute line.
And we have 2 lines, so.
So I think one of the things I'm glad you brought it forward. I think you should be proud of yourselves for bringing it forward. I think one solution, as you propose, is longer lunches. I think what I'd be really interested in is what are some other solutions to that. Also, if we went with the longer lunches, what would be some of the trade-offs? Would that mean a longer school day? And what are some of the implications? So as you're doing civics research, which is awesome, understanding how, and I think this goes to something to Mr. Lancaster, if you really want to understand something, try to change it, and then you'll start to see some of the different impacts. But you're on the right track about asking the right questions to get to that. So I would really be interested in more data to better understand your challenge, because I think that line is pretty long. So and can empathize having lived it as an educator myself.
Mrs. Scales?
And I'm just curious as to what you think would be a good amount of time for lunch.
25 minutes?
Yeah, 20, at least 25, just like 5 more minutes because
So we could get to
yeah,
passing
when we're
periods.
going like when we're dismissed from our classes to go down for lunch, usually we'll stop at our lockers to get our lunches. But by the time we're getting down there, the other grades are still coming out, so that kind of inflicts with like the time periods of us getting in and eating our lunch with the lines that we have to wait in to get our lunch.
Mr. Domenici?
So I'm the parent of a Coelho Middle School student and 2 Thatcher Elementary School students. And I mention this because I read articles in the Sun Chronicle about this very thing, and it's been on social media, and you have 3 votes in the affirmative from my kids. It's not enough time. And many parents in that end, and I understand it's not always easy. You take a minute from each class. Maybe there were a lot of suggestions, but to Mr. Quinn's point, what would potentially help is not only identifying the issue, but coming in with a proposal of how to get there. That's as a project manager, it's what I do. I always tell folks, and I even tell my own kids, it's easy to identify the problem. Sometimes a little tougher, but when you come with an idea and say, here's how we think we can get there, that just brings even more to the table. And I think you're there. I think you have all the data to back it up, and I think you can probably figure out where you want to go with how do you get those extra 5 minutes per lunch session. So however many lunch sessions there are, I think you probably have it. And I would suggest, and first off, I'm an advocate for you, so you sold me. But if you want to sell the gentleman to your right and the lady to your right, then bring that there too, and defend it.
Mr. Storrs?
So I think this is great, and I when it comes to civics, I like when it's something that actually affects you, because you're more passionate about it. And I can see the passion that you put into this. To me, it's all about data, right? So when you want to make a change, showing the data is the way to make that happen. So like the kind of questions I could ask is, how long does it take a student who brought their own lunch to eat as compared to somebody who has to stand in line? How long are they waiting in line? So as you can see, those kind of questions that could result in data, that's meaningful. If you can show that type of data, actually research that and show that, that's the kind of thing that could actually lead to change, and I think that's really good.
Mr. Geddes?
Just generally speaking, about Citizen United, the entire presentation tonight. The first word in student leadership is student, so educational leadership should be driven to some extent by the students. So I'm excited to hear that there was consideration about the lab possibly having students as part of those boards. But in seeing the effort that you guys have put in, I often get asked what skills should students have coming into college to be more successful in college. And we've talked over the last few years about developing more soft skills around research, planning, presentation skills, communication skills. You guys are getting a lot of the stuff. I know you're, and I mentioned the word college. I'm sure your parents are here saying, why is he talking about college to my 8th grader? But you guys are taking advantage of a great opportunity. So I hope you guys in 4 years are in Mr. Hodges' class as well.
We're the future leaders.
Mr. Domenici?
Yeah, just speaking of that, I know you're back there letting the young students take their bow, and deservedly so. But Brian, I remember you were part of the cohort along with me almost 3 years ago when we started our high school project and our visioning. And I mention this, I've done this a couple of times, because I'd say about 85% of those 3 days we're talking about what we want out of education and then how to build a school around it. And education reform, what I find there that's fitting to me is that by even bringing up the discussion and brainstorming, this whole class is education reform. You are stepping away from the lecture platform and more to the facilitation platform as educators yourselves, which is a change. The students are directing more of their education within guidelines. So I love seeing this, because this is part of the 5-year plan. It's part of what we talked about 3 years ago at the visioning sessions. And we always continue to get these examples and spotlights here at the school committee meetings that continue to impress me and show just how much of that shift we're making here. And, you know, I've got friends who are educators in other districts, either in Massachusetts or in Rhode Island, and this level is not there. I mean, once again, Attleboro continues to lead as opposed to, you know, reacting. So I'm very impressed with this overall presentation, and I am curious, Aiden, as to, you know, some of the tangible results of what you came up with for education reform. So if you have an opportunity after the meeting to pass some of that along, I would love to see it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Quinn?
I think you raised a really interesting point about being a world history teacher, now being asked to make a shift in terms of less structuring our class around civics, action civics. And while it may sound simple, the work that we're trying to do is really hard. We see that just even from a governmental or political level. And it's really easy to do poorly or half-heartedly, or just doing it with good intentions, but not having the structure and the resources in place or the knowledge about how to make this work. So what I really appreciate is having Generation Citizen that gives a model for teachers who may not be familiar with this work.
It helped a lot.
And then just, because I think it's, unless you're, I think you were put in a really challenging spot, and I commend you for jumping in.
Like, I would have never thought of, these are the strategies that they provide, and the kids get to pick which ones they want to do. And I would have never thought to come up with this on my own. So this came from Generation Citizens.
And then just, thinking about the network you need to cultivate in order to help students move along this continuum. I love the skills that are embedded, whether it be storytelling, like how do we tell a story about what's going on with our lunch situation. Doing authentic research where there's actually skin in the game and you have to present it to an audience that may be receptive, may give you a little bit of pushback. And that, that there's the skill of also articulating, and I think this is one of the critiques that you sometimes see in youth movements. Well, yeah, it's great that you're protesting or you're doing this movement. What are your asks? And this is a really comprehensive framework that gets to the heart of creating change. So I'm glad we're on board. Again, I'm involved with Generation Citizens, so I'm a little bit biased here. But I think it's super important that you get the resources that you need, because this is hard work, this is time-consuming work, and it doesn't necessarily come intuitive. So kudos on your effort, and I'm glad it's available for you.
And along those lines, Mr. Hodges, I think you mentioned earlier that there's additional training planned. Can you give us kind of an idea of what's still to come? Will this be across other grades? What are the plans going forward?
Yeah, so it's a little bit in the beta version still, where we're trying to sort out the exact specifics of that. But so, like Donna said, the 8th grade curriculum over the next year or two is going to be shifting to, it's going to be a civics class. And they're going to be required to do civics projects as part of the new standards and some legislation that came out. The other half of that is that it's also required in the high school as well. We have a little more flexibility than the middle school. We don't have to do it in a particular grade, but one of the big shifts we'll be making is how do we, now that Missy and I have sort of had this training, and how do we scale this out? So yeah, we're looking to try to build in a couple more teachers next year, hopefully, and then try to keep the partnership with Generation Citizen going, because I think Dave really hit the nail on the head with, for a lot of people, this is going to be a very different kind of work, right? Like, this is not your standard social studies curriculum. This is not your standard social studies experience, and it's going to require, a good amount of support and training to help realize that. But like we're seeing, hopefully the results of that are empowered, engaged students who are able to interact with their communities in meaningful ways and change for the better.
I apologize for all the emails, the future emails you're receiving.
Sorry now. Sorry.
Not at all. Send them along.
Thank you. Well, Mrs. Johnson?
It's just real quick in closing. Ladies, I want to thank you all for taking the time, doing the research, coming here and presenting. I think we also gave you a couple takeaways and some more information that we'd like to hear. And as you compile that information, please keep us up to date. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Great job.
Thank you, guys.
Now we have, next on our agenda, we have our Student Advisory Council and a round Attleboro update. Ms. Larson, Mr. Lancaster, turn it over to the two of you.
You may not.
We'll start off with elementary schools. The math MCAS is happening pretty soon, so the 3rd and 4th graders will take that from May 7th through the 10th, and then Willett has a field trip for their orchestra on May 24th.
Yeah, and then for the middle schools, MCAS continues for sure. The Brennan has their Night of Fine Arts, the Coelho Spring Concert. That's pretty cool. I remember we had ours at Brennan a couple times, which is always fun to go to. Also, the Junior National Honor Society induction ceremony. That was awesome when I was there. Kind of a taste of what's to come for those kinds of students. That when they get to high school, they get hopefully at least into the National Honor Society. And then the same for the other middle schools as well.
So this week's AP exam week, which isn't really our favorite, but it's fine. And then this time of the year, it's really great because you kind of start to get recognized for the past 9 months of hard work. So we have awards night and scholarship night coming up, and then the one-act drama festival, and that'll be on May 18th, and that's open to the whole public. So if you want to come.
The Special Olympics, I don't know if you guys heard, it was moved. Unfortunately, we had a rain date, but then the rain date was getting rained out, so we have another rain date, which is in the summer now. So we're coming back after we graduate, which will be fun, to the high school. I'm volunteering. I'm on golf cart duty this year, so it's going to be a great event. Hopefully it's not raining, and yeah, it always is a good event, and I'm sure you guys have heard about it and everything. It speaks wonders to the community. It really does.
And then this week is Staff Appreciation Week, so I know we just had a bunch of teachers in the room, but they went home. Just wanted to thank everyone in all the buildings that puts, all their work into just making us as students successful, and all the behind-the-scenes work that goes on as well.
Yeah.
Thank you both. Mr. Geist, did you have a question?
More of an additional event. We've talked a little bit about doing a farewell to this high school and the old high school on County Street. We will be hosting something on Saturday, June 1st, in collaboration with the Historical Preservation Society. So 10 a.m. there will be a light reception and a brief ceremony at 10:15. The building will be open until 2 p.m. that day. So any alum or family of alum that would like to come participate, we will have as many yearbooks as possible from the time of that being a high school. I'm not sure how many Brennan Middle School yearbooks we can track down, but please feel free to stop by and take a walk around the old building before we lose it publicly.
Thank you. All right, so next, our business agenda tonight, we'll start with the report of the superintendent. Mr. Sawyer?
Thank you, Chairman. I have 2 brief presentations for you this evening. The first, I'm going to ask Mr. Furtado to update the committee on where we stand with FY20. Button to the right.
Perhaps.
To update the committee on the FY20 budget, as the committee knows, the city proposed a budget already to the municipal council of $78,124,428, which represents a 4.6% increase from the prior year. As we reported to the committee, the level services estimate was $500,000 north of that at $78,646,460, which would have been a 5.3% increase. And the school committee approved a urgent needs budget of $79,598,460, a 6.6% increase.
Mr. Tato?
Yes. Yeah.
Any questions on this slide before we move on? I just have one question regarding kind of the process. So the bottom number is what we submitted,
Yes.
and the top number is what the mayor sent down as what will be considered by the city council.
The following day, yes.
Okay. And looking at what we submitted, which is about $1.5 million more than what we're getting, correct?
Yes.
And that 6.6% increase isn't out of line with what similar departments in the city are getting, correct?
That's my understanding, looking at the city budget.
Mr. Storrs?
So, just to reiterate, nothing has changed since the last meeting that we had, right? The numbers,
The numbers haven't changed. What did change is there was a formal presentation to the municipal council since our last meeting.
meaning what we were told was gonna happen has happened. It's moved forward on that side.
Yeah.
And per our meeting 2 weeks ago, you had made it pretty clear, I thought, that if we had a $500,000, give or take, deficit, that's not something that we could, as you put it, recover from unless we took actions. We made changes. A $500,000 is not something that we can just not
Smooth out.
not deal with, is a good way to put it. And that's all I wanted to say at this point.
Yep.
Thank you.
So when we look at 20 funding, again, as you know, since it's formally been proposed to the municipal council, the number can't go up. It can only be reduced. So at that budget funding level, Chapter 70 increased modestly in the House Ways and Means. That process is still not over. We still don't know where we're going to land in terms of school funding for the year through the state. However, that Chapter 70 number is up $127,000 from last time we met. The city contribution that's associated with a budget of $78,124,428 is up 1.6% from prior year. And then finally, and an important thing to note, total city educational spending, which includes funding for charter schools for school choice, as well as the $200,000 for the stabilization fund that's been proposed in the budget that's been presented to the council, is up 3.4%.
Mr. Geddes?
So, we're looking at 1.6 APS contribution, total education spending up 3.4%. Are those percentages in line with, you're more in this day-to-day than are these in line with previous increases in percentage-wise? Or are they, I'm looking at the Chapter 70 increase from the state, which is substantial. So when I look at the proposed budget being up 4.6%, total education spending at 3.4%, I can't help but think of a huge chunk of that percentage coming from that state contribution, that Chapter 70 contribution. So
yeah, I think the takeaway could be, 2/3 to 3/4 of the increase of the budget, that 4.6%, is being driven by state funding. Yes.
So the 1.6 and the 3.4 are those similar percentages in those numbers from previous years, or?
I think the 3.4 is close. I think the 1.6 is not.
Okay. Thank you.
And just to Mr. Geddes' point, because I think he hit on something important, which has been kind of what we've been hitting on that's frustrating, rhetorically coming from messaging about the budget, is that Attleboro is lucky this year in what it's receiving from the state. It's getting a very big bump this year. And while the level service budget, while the proposed budget is 4.6% increased over last year, even with that being not enough, the vast majority of that is coming from the state.
Right.
And so while we have acknowledged in the past, and I think continue to acknowledge, the city can't solve our problem, this is a situation where it just seems like it's reversed, that the city is letting the state kind of carry the oar this year, which is frustrating after the progress we've made the past few years.
I can only say that the city has faced some challenges with the charter school and school choice, and then by allocating money to a stabilization fund rather than operating.
Mr. Quinn?
But in terms of, if we were, I tend to look at NSS because that gives us a comparison. My understanding is that I think it's fantastic that we have this fund in place. I'm glad that it was established. We can't count that money towards our NSS until that's actually spent, right? That's essentially in a lockbox.
Right, it's not in our budget. We'd have to request the use of the funds.
Oh, yeah. So I think just in, when the final NSS numbers come out, I think we'll have a clearer picture of that. But I think at least preliminary, for a sake of apples to apples across the state, now that total education spending, does that include transportation in that number as well?
Does not.
Okay. It does not.
That's net school spending dollars. And charter school tuitions, and school choice, and the $200,000 for stabilization.
Okay. I didn't think the liability was that high, in part because Chapter 70 is factored into. Well, I mean, let's just take school choice for the sake of example. That comes right out of our Chapter 70, so that would be a reduction out of that number.
School choice is a credit the city can take against our net school spending, yes.
Okay. And I think we're kind of playing like a semantic game here a little bit, but the $5,000 is deducted from our Chapter 70, right? It's just one pocket or the other. That's the funding mechanism. And as is the charter school payment. I mean, I think if we're 50-50, our Chapter 70 increases if we get more enrollment into charter schools as well.
Right. If you wanted to assume that there was no school choice, no Attleboro students going out of Attleboro to other schools via school choice, our budget would have increased by $500,000.
And so along those lines, what is the city's contribution towards transportation? So what would that?
Just under $4 million. So this whole netting out and getting credits, they're identifying about $5 million in credits, and transportation is about 3.9 million, so they net about 1.1 million in that process.
Thank you.
Mr. Storrs?
Just to clear, I want to make sure things are clear. So the transportation is kind of how do you
non-net school spending.
Thank you. Right, it's a separate thing that has to be done by law, by the city, and it's separate from the net school. I wanted to make sure that was clear.
Yeah.
So when we're talking total city education spending, that includes transportation?
It does not.
It does not. That's why we're okay.
Yeah, that.
Mr. Quinn?
I think that's a little confusing because what that would assume is that if we kept all of Chapter 70 and city, we'd have like an $81 million budget. And I think that total city spending, in part, is reflection of a deduction, or they keep all of Chapter 70, so they keep that whole, and then.
Well, there's no Chapter 70. In other words, the checks that the city has to write to support the Attleboro Public Schools after getting the state Chapter 70 funds. Those are those two numbers.
So part of.
So they're writing a check for $37 million for the Attleboro schools, but the total check they write is $41 million to support charter school, school choice, and the stabilization check. So the total spending on education is up 3.4%.
So just to, I'm not trying to be pedantic here, but I think. So let's just tease out our piece of it. So let's call it, it's $4.5 million. So there's like a $4.5 million pool of other, correct?
Of choice and charter.
Choice and charter.
Yep.
Our total liability for choice and charter is 5, correct? 5.6.
No, because, no, you net out the, tuition reimbursement, cause they get reimbursed.
But that's 300,000, so we're still at 5.3.
458.
453. So now
Yeah.
we're in the fives. So
Yeah,
I
it's just 5, yeah.
all right. So I'm guess like maybe I'm not making my point clear enough. It's that number right there, that 41.9,
Yeah,
assumes that assumes that most of the choice and charter is being paid by the city. Correct?
it's a deduct and local aid from the cherry sheet, yes.
Right. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is that they're taking that deduction.
Yeah.
But what I think that they're doing instead, and again, it's more of it's just more of an accounting than anything else.
Right.
My understanding is that at least all of the school choice spending is accounted for in Chapter 70, correct? So we get the full 40, and then they draw 5,000 out for every kid who goes to a different. So while the city may be cutting the check, it's backfilled by Chapter 70.
So you're saying the 3.4% is skewed because it's actually Chapter 70 funding and
I
not
think there's some
city
Chapter 70 funding in there. I think they ultimately write the check.
That's what I think
And
you're
but
saying.
because I don't see how we could be writing. So I know from my understanding and talking with folks from MAC is that when the foundation budget is set, it accounts for charter school kids as though it was just another kid that was added to your per pupil expenditure. Now, that is a function of, we get about a 50-50 cost share, right? So for every student in our district, the state picks up half, and we pick up half, give or take. Is that
Yeah.
correct? So I guess logic would follow if they're following a similar formula for charter school kids, the state is picking up half of the cost for that student, correct? And then we are picking up the other half of that cost. So if our total liability for charter schools is, without any sort of deduction with Chapter 70, is that it couldn't be close to 5, because then it's not taking into account the 50-50 cost share.
I see what you're saying.
So, Mark, isn't it, I mean, to key in, isn't it safe to say that normally we're getting half of the funding per student from the state and half from the city?
For our students.
For our students, right. So any student that we would send out of district, effectively the same formula, give or take, could be applied to those students. Half the funding for that student is coming from the state and half the funding for that student is coming from the city. Which means if we're paying $5 million to send students out, it's really half of that is from the state and half of that is from the city.
I believe that
Isn't that effectively what you're
the
saying?
numbers we get are, again, cherry sheet
Yeah.
assessments against the city.
Yep.
I do not believe it's Chapter 70.
Well,
So you're saying they get credit for it, but really the funding for the.
They get charged for the tuitions and they get credit for the reimbursement.
so, whether it's the Attleboro City APS contribution is 1.6%.
Right.
The total city education spending is at most 3.4%, depending on
Yeah, okay.
whatever it is. If it's 3.4 or not, it's too low. So far too low.
Yeah, sorry, I got you into the weeds there.
That's all.
So we discussed last time, as the city's budget proposal was submitted, what would the impacts be, and we explained that we were going to follow the recommended cuts that were discussed in a meeting we had with the city. So, to find the $522,000 difference between a level service budget and what was proposed in municipal council, these were the cuts.
Mr. Furtado, you started to say it, but just I want to be clear, this is the difference between the level service budget, which is not the budget that we had put forth.
Which is not the budget you requested, right? Correct, yeah. So
I'm sorry,
these are
just to verify before you move forward, these are the recommendations from
the city.
the city, not
Our
what we're,
meeting with the city.
not what we're necessarily gonna do, what they are recommending we do at this moment.
This is what the city is telling us we can do to to not meet level services.
It's effectively
So
a
if-
recommendation on their
right.
part. They don't get to tell us how
They
to.
don't,
to
but if they're
design.
gonna say that we get $500,000 less, and we know it's not gonna work out, my
Right.
inclination would be to say.
I just wanted to get it clear. This is their recommendations that we're about to go through.
And again, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that the other half of that discussion had to do with free cash, and I don't think anybody in the room was under the impression that there was any way to replace these funds again through our budget as we just discussed. So this is a pretty solid financial liability we have going into FY20.
Mr. Geddes?
So, for those watching at home, 2 weeks ago, a number of us, a few times, referenced a memo that Mr. Furtado has shared with us at the request of Mrs. Sawyer, Mr. Storrs, and others the meeting before. So this first dollar figure FY20 estimate is what the district believes will be needed for level services.
Yes.
The FY20 suggestion is what the city administration is saying, is what they put forth to the city council for us to use in each of these line items. The third column is the shortage that would leave us.
Right.
And the FY19 projection is what we anticipate and plan
current
on,
year.
and which is why you arrived at that first set of numbers to begin with.
Correct, exactly.
And so when we talked about and at the risk of reiterating what we talked about 2 weeks ago, we're looking at out-of-district tuitions, which are legally mandated costs from the state, a difference of $300,000. And I know that the stabilization fund is created to handle out-of-district tuition, but I believe it was to cover unexpected out-of-district tuition. That $300,000 is expected. So that for one, the $200,000 doesn't cover the $300,000 that we expect. It's $100,000 short of that, and it's. I just talked myself into an angry circle. I apologize. But it also doesn't leave any room for the unexpected money, which we saw nearly $1 million of just this year alone.
And again, yeah, I'd like to point out we're in first week in May for an event that's going to occur 2 months from now. Begin to occur 2 months from now and go an additional 12 months from then. It's a concerning situation.
And then along those same lines, contractually obligated other, obviously a much smaller number, but some of that stuff is contractually obligated. The legal fees, that's not a legal requirement that we pay those, but we are expected, we're going into a contract year. Last time we had a contract year, we spent about $85,000. And then it was higher than usual the following year because one of the union negotiations extended an extra year. I think if we tried to cut out of district tuitions, the legal fees would probably skyrocket as well. So there's, to Mr. Storrs' point earlier, something we tried to emphasize last time was, although the objective is to avoid layoffs, and none of these cuts directly result in layoffs, when we have to fund some of the stuff that we're required to fund, so to cover those differences, there's, and I'm not saying, by no means am I advocating for layoffs. We would want to avoid layoffs at all costs, but the likelihood of layoffs in order to cover some of these differences drastically increases, correct? Did that make sense?
I
worded it
completely understand what you
awkwardly.
said, but again, based on the meeting we had, we're under the impression that it will be addressed if it becomes a genuine.
Through one-time requests, so anytime we go over in legal fees, we would go to the city council. When we come up against the out-of-district tuitions we already know we're going to have to pay, we would have to go to the city council. Okay.
Mrs. Domenici?
Well, and that's the point. I have two really quick questions, because the first one maybe it's just a line item thing here. I was looking at the substitutes, and it's it seems like the estimates for fiscal year 20 versus the fiscal year projection for this year is astronomically different.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting observation, and here's what happened. As you can see, 87,000 in terms of order of magnitude is not 900,000.
No.
So they found, we do have a few lines that are in surplus in the substitute at that time. But substitute as a whole, for this year are gonna run about $900,000. We budgeted totally in all of the lines about 807, so it's almost a $100,000 deficit. They didn't take those into account. They just found the ones that were above water at this time. And again, the season's coming. It's not here yet. That's what happened.
Agree. And as is mentioned, this is around the time of year where that traditionally has spiked.
Yep.
And Rob, I think I'm always careful to, the layoff word is a tough one to use. But I mean, my concern from a practical and my financial background standpoint is some of these, a lot of these are a hedge. Maybe we can get away, maybe we get lucky on some of these smaller line items. The top line item is a known quantity. But the business model of taking one-time funds from a stabilization fund to fund continuous operating expenses is not economically sound. It never has been. It's not the purpose behind using a stabilization fund, or I guess, maybe they'll call free cash something a little different, but that's the challenge that I'm having trouble wrapping around. I mean, some of these line items, it's, we can estimate it, and then when we, it's essentially a wait and see, wait until we get over. And I mean, and I'm trying to look at the whole, right, and I'm trying to look at the whole picture here in that $522,000 is about 0.6% of this entire budget. So there's not, I don't know if this is considered fat. It's that's a pretty lean budget. If you're utilizing, even with at the city's run through here, 99.4% of what we're asking for level services is utilized, and this is what they come up with. My concerns are obviously the timing of such events. If the mayor and his administration have guaranteed that these are funds that are there, that's great. But now there's a process by which we have to go ask for it. It's got to get down to council. Council's got to vote through, and I know the council would see something like this, and they're usually pretty quick once they have it of moving it through. But the timing could be tough, and I'm especially concerned about that top line item because we can't be delinquent on those types of funds.
So real quick, and then Mr. Storrs, because what Mr. Domenici said is something that I wanted to hit on, which is the timing of these requests, and I guess I would ask you guys are in conversations with City Hall more than any of us are. We haven't had the best luck when we've had issues in the past, as infrequently as they've been, getting these matters covered. It seems like there's a promise, if not, outright, that they understand we're not going to be able to meet this, and that they have money available for us when the time comes, and the circus we've gone through in the past won't be what we're looking at for next January. Is that your feeling?
Again, a couple of things there. The free cash was certified in the late fall, so nothing would happen before then, sort of November timeframe. The other part of this is, we have a roster. We have the student names, the schools they're attending, the tuitions for 20, and it's not calculus to figure out what the total is. So that FY20 estimate, and again, that's as we sit here today, not to even consider what happens over the next 4 months to see if the population goes up, but we certainly have names and tuitions that would consume that $3.3 million estimate for FY20. So that would be part of the information we would provide to the council in our request.
A couple of questions, if I may. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, yeah, first, the $300,000 that's being recommended by City Hall in the tuitions for special education, and I want to stress that, special education. You just said it. We know how many students are going, we know the cost. So when you came up with the 3.35, which now it sounds like it's $100,000 actually short, is that a fair statement?
There's
At a minimum.
a potential.
If not
That hasn't
more.
happened. but-
Okay, yeah, but it sounds like it's probably gonna. The point being is, where in the world did they come up with the idea of, oh, just cut $300,000 for special education tuition, cut $64,000 from utilities? It's almost ludicrous, but beyond that, this is my issue. Have we ever approved a budget at this time that did not meet our operational needs for a full year?
Not in my career here, I can't.
Are you advocating that this committee approve a budget that is not gonna cover the operational costs for a full school year? I understand what you're being guided by somebody outside of this room, but the question I'm simply asking is, we know that if we approve that number, it doesn't meet our operational needs for a cost of a year. Is that a fair statement?
That's true.
And that's been communicated.
I understand.
And stated publicly.
But what I'm trying to get at is, you guys are not advocating for us to approve a budget that we know won't meet by $500,000.
No, but
No, I don't think they're advocating
that
for
in the process, right?
Well,
Yeah,
but
I don't think they shouldn't be advocating for us to pass or not pass it, but they've advocated for the budgets that we've sent down.
Oh, and I understand that,
And
but
so
we're
that's-
past that now,
yeah.
unfortunately. What I'm trying to get at is this idea of free cash covering $500,000, if not 600,000, if not 650, whatever it's gonna end up being, if not more, doesn't make any sense, and I don't think this committee could rely on that. We can't say, oh, let's hope they cover a $650,000 deficit in free cash. So, as you just indicated, we've never approved a budget that didn't meet the operational needs of our school district for a full school year. If we approve that number, we're doing that. We would be approving a budget and hoping that we might get money out of free cash if somebody votes yes over the course of the year, multiple times. Because I imagine every single time we go over, we'd have to ask for more, a little more, please. I'd like some more, please. I'm trying to do my Oliver, whatever he is. That doesn't seem sound, that doesn't seem logical, and I agree with Mr. Dominici. That's not the way we've ever done business before, as far as I can remember. Am I off in any way? Thank you.
Mr. Larson?
Just to Mr. Storr's point, we are beyond the point of approving any budget. We presented a budget, or the administration presented budgets to us. We selected which budget to send to City Hall. We are now in the process of which every other department is. We've submitted our request to the mayor. The mayor is going to send down to the city council, which he already has. The mayor picks the number for every city department's budget. The mayor has picked ours. There's no more approving that number. There's no more denying that number. What we basically at this point have to do is manage the number.
So deal with it.
So, and it's a matter of dealing with it. And the decisions that we have in the next month to make is how are we going to address the number?
But the issue is there are contractual obligations that we talked about at the last meeting.
No, you're absolutely correct.
It's
We
not a month. It's a
we are
week.
starting at half, in my
It's a
opinion,
week.
my humble opinion, we are starting $500,000 in the hole.
Thank you.
Day
Yes,
one.
I'm right there with you.
Okay? We need to remember what happened over the course of last summer that created part of the issue that we're into right now. I hate to say it that way, but we had unexpected expenses over the summer of just over $600,000. Okay? If that were to happen again, we already have a problem. That would just make a problem exponentially worse. And so, I think as a committee, we need to decide how we are going to help the administration manage the number that is now in front of us. It doesn't matter what number we want. It's a matter of what number we're going to get. And we need to decide, are we going to go into the year with an unbalanced budget, in our own opinion, or are we gonna take steps in the next 30 days? I'm not suggesting anything, I'm just, it's just a point that, are we gonna start the year with an unbalanced budget, or are we going to balance it in the next 30 days and start forward with a zero-based budget. That's, in my opinion, that's the decisions we have as a committee in front of us.
Mr. Geddes?
And along those terms, Mr. Larson, in the few years we've been on the committee together, you've often used the word unsustainable, that how we are funded on a year-to-year basis, and is just unsustainable. My concern with, because the budget gets calculated based on what was given to us the year before, not always what was spent. And so if we're using free cash for one-time costs, if we're using free cash instead of for one-time costs, but rather for operational costs, that's just going to create a larger budget between what we spent and what we spent for FY20 and what we are going to probably be budgeted for FY21. And so as that deficit grows and grows and grows, we put ourselves in a far more precarious position. So we need to look long-term as well.
Mr. Quinn and Mr. Larson?
One of the things that I appreciated about the mayor's budget message is that he was clear in saying that this is a very lean budget, that there was no, if I'm interpreting, I don't remember the precise phrasing that he used, but I think that he was saying that there's no fat, or it was like a very judicious budget. And what I think is really impressive is that, as Mr. Domenici pointed out, we're talking about 0.6% here, right? And that when we culled through the budget, the things that we were able to identify are things that we are hedging against, because if we didn't hedge against them, they'd blow a hole in our operating budget. And then we'd really be cutting into the already underfunded resources. I would love to see the creative things that Assistant Superintendent Regan, the building principals, and the teachers could do if they put $500,000 back into resources, right? Like we're covered. We know we got this $300,000 expense. Like we're not allocating these monies towards our goal of dare to be average, as Mr. Larson once said. This is just covering us for catastrophic rainy day funds. And so I think it's good that it's acknowledged that this is the reality, right? That this, even with this, it's not a luxurious budget. It's a very tight budget, but that we're called. We have so many needs, and that we would only have about $500,000 left. Again, in some things that we're anticipating, I think is pointing to the case that we've been making all along, that we're really advocating towards a needs-based budget, and that I share the concern of my colleagues, but I'm also kind of confused or amused that we're really going over essentially in the scope of this budget like couch change, right? This is what we're it's a nickel and diming type thing. That's how tight we are.
I agree, and I agree that the recognition that it's a lean budget is appropriate, but to make the argument that it's a budget that avoids layoffs or have an educational impact, when the only way that you can even make that argument is by essentially starting at a $500,000 shortfall, it's disingenuous and not true. I mean, we're being asked to budget $500,000 less than we think we'll spend in the best case scenario, to have no quote educational impact, even though I would argue several of those cuts have those anyway. Mr. Larson?
Sometimes I fixate on numbers too many times, but if, just to go along with Mr. Geddes' point, if in fact we fund $522,000 of expenses with free cash, next year most of us will be sitting around this table looking at that number, and because we did this, it will be $1 million.
Correct.
And that's assuming that the funding for education is neutral. We know it will go up at least 3 to 4%. So it will be the 500 this year, the 500 to cover it, and 3 or 4% on top of that. So from your unsustainability concept, we're there.
Mrs. Sawyer?
Well, ultimately, I mean, it is what it is. I mean, the budgets lean on our side and so lean on the city side. And what we really need to work on is like, how do we fix the formula? Because that's the only way that this is gonna make it sustainable for everyone.
Mr. Stewart?
I mean, I wish we had the ability to do that. The formula's out of our control. I mean, really to summarize this whole thing is, the way I see it is, we've got a $500,000 to $600,000 hole. We're being told by the city to, don't worry about it. It'll work out. Come to see us and we'll give you some free cash a bunch of times over the course of a year, which I think that would be not the right thing for this governing board to do. Or do what we've done every other year we've had a budget deficit, which is close it. And it's never a pretty thing and it's never a good thing, but it's the right thing. You don't go into a school year knowing you're gonna be $500,000, $600,000 short. You don't do that. You figure out what you have to do, as difficult as it is, to close that so that you can go into the school year and have a budget that meets what you're gonna do. Unless I'm missing something, that's the way I see it.
Mr. Domenici?
I had a question for you, Mr. Furtado. I may have asked this at one point, and I apologize if I'm repeating myself. I haven't asked it yet tonight, but so the commitment from the mayor's office is a $2.25 million funding above what is called net school spending or the required budget. And in the previous year, that was around 2.9. Now, I understand that jumps up, it's not, there's been a certain pattern. And I guess my question is, I felt like there were certain funding sources that had previously been part of prior budgets that are not a part of this budget. And, do you know, like, what are those? Like, do you have insight into what those are? I mean, I know there's a certain amount of the levy that goes to education as part of the city's commitment. Meals tax money as part of the commitment, but I thought there were other funding sources that had, at least for the last several years, been a part of what was provided by the city that may not be there this year, that they couldn't do.
Yes, there were 3 or 4 other what was kind of generically called hold harmless funding areas that the city helped. One of the helped with what we were doing. One of those had been with our criminal justice program at CTE. One of them had been some new growth monies. So there were other funding. One of them had been straight to avoid a budget deficit, just again I think a free cash infusion during the year. But those were for specific purposes at specific times and were relieved in the formation of the 20 budget.
So, for however many years prior, this was funding that had been provided by the city, and because I guess, the budget is lean everywhere, these were funding sources that they could not commit to for the current fiscal year?
Yeah.
Or point forwards, or, who knows? You can't predict the future.
Just for point of clarification, I think, it's something that's happened over time. I think we're in a streak where we're kind of, not a streak, but we're on an upward trend where the meals tax was first, and that was $1 million. Then it was half of the levy, which was about $900,000, and then the next couple of years there were a few $100,000 that were added through the criminal justice program, through other things to help our budget, meet our budget. And other than the first 2 that were done about 4 or 5 years ago, they were all pulled back this year.
Yes.
Thank you, that's what I was trying to clarify, so.
Mr. Quinn?
Did you get a two-part question? I saw that new growth was anticipated at 500,000 this year. I think typically it's been over $1 million. I wonder if there's any hope to I know that new growth is a function set by the state more so than just estimating out of the city office. I wonder if could be a conversation about what might happen if new growth is, as we go in, increases above projections as a potential source of revenue. But along similar lines, I'm curious, did you get any sort of indication on what seems to be the drivers in the other departments that's causing the leanness of the budget relative to prior years? Or was that not discussed?
We didn't know what the city department budgets were at the time of our meeting, and we would never go into a meeting to discuss, what's going on in other departments, because, we usually have a compelling discussion to have about our budget.
And just to clarify, it was more of a question about revenues and what the cost centers were that were driving it, than questioning that. I mean, I know the other department heads make really good faith efforts to be, fiscally responsible. It was more just to kind of understand the context behind why this is a particularly lean budget year.
Is that it?
Yes.
So, sorry. We're before the city council on Thursday,
Yes.
5:30-ish.
I didn't get invited.
I believe it was.
There's a
I
shocker.
was gonna say 4:30, but maybe 5:30.
Jerry, you're just the chair.
Okay, so that was my first of two brief updates. My second is on school choice. For this, I'd also invite Mr. Darrows up to join us. And turn it over to Ms. Regan.
Thank you, Lieutenant Sawyer. So, at the school committee meeting a couple weeks ago, we had talked about possibly looking into school choice as a possible option to support to support our funding for schools. So what we did is we looked into school choice in Massachusetts. And to give you a little bit of background, it has been an option for about 27 years. In 1992, there were about 32 districts that were participating in it, and in 2019, there were about 189 districts participating. It does allow families options to send children to neighboring districts and schools based upon their current enrollment and programs or seats available in their current grades. Tuition is $5,000 per student that is paid for by the sending district to the receiving district. And there is no cap on special education charges, meaning that if a child comes in with specific needs, whatever those may be, those are then reimbursed to the district for special education needs. So, school choice in Attleboro. Currently, right now, we have about 37 students that are participating in virtual schooling, either TECA or Greenfield. Some of them are participating in this type of schooling for a variety of reasons. Anxiety, school phobia may be one of them. Norton Public Schools is educating about 30 of our students, and we have a couple students that are attending other neighboring communities at about 28. So in total, 96 students are receiving education outside of the Attleboro Public Schools for a total of $475,000.
Have we started to look into why Norton has such a high number compared to other districts around us? Is that something we have looked into, or?
I know Mr. Geddes has been working on a survey for the past couple of weeks. I don't know if you want to speak to that.
That's kind of the point of the survey.
I'll wait to the next item on the agenda then.
But to that point, like we need to understand why, although Norton has 30 compared to, like you said, Taunton 8, Dayton Rehoboth 3 or 4, Dayton Rehoboth 3, Fall River 4. Why is that? That's something we do need to determine.
Quinn?
If I had to venture a hypothesis, it's probably a function. It's number of seats available, number one. Number two, transportation is not provided, so it's whatever is convenient for the parent to get their child to. So I think given that proximity, Fall River's, Taunton's a heck of a drive, Norton may not be. DR, depending on where you live, might be a drive. So that I think functions into why a family might do that.
Mrs. Storrs?
I believe Norton, I believe it was Norton, also, they have middle school sports, or at least one of the districts did, and that might be a draw.
Which is also listed on the
Mr.
survey. You mentioned the virtual schools get a number of students as a result of anxieties. Does that count as an out-of-district student through special education?
No.
I didn't think so. Okay, just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Mrs. Sawyer?
So say we approve this and it's a lottery, it's, we open up 6 classes, 6 seats here, 6 seats there, it's a lottery. We have no way of knowing if the student requires special education until they come into the district?
Correct.
And we would have to fund this fully until we get reimbursed?
Correct.
And say we do not have said program, we would have to create one?
Or send them to an
Send
out-of-district
Or
placement.
send them somewhere else? Okay.
Mr. Quinn?
And point of clarification, the sending district were responsible if we sent the student out of district, correct?
Correct.
And then we were also able to send in, watching our special education liaison, we're able to send out billing based on hours and services to, I don't know if it's to the district or to the Chapter 70 program. We send that into the state,
Yep,
and they
through the-
reimburse us on an hourly rate.
Correct. It's the same process as, it's actually the same funding, the increment, as circuit breaker.
Excellent, thank you.
Mr.
And
Demanchi?
Is it a similar time frame to get that funds, to get those funding? So we have to upfront costs,
And then claim them and get reimbursed.
claim them and
Same
get
year.
reimbursed.
We claim, the opening period for claiming on the increments was April.
We're already looking at a line item deficit, promises from the city to help us with that line item deficit. If we make this decision, I don't know where that commitment falls. If we have to cover it up front, it would be a concern of mine. There's a lot of factors that we're gonna still talk about, but that would be a concern, and whether or not the city would say, well, wait a minute, you've now opened up the door for X number of students, and now you've increased your gap in special education funding, and, we said we could help you on this line item, but, this other one you might be challenged.
Mrs. Sawyer?
Well, potentially raising it all, it's a lottery, you could.
Absolutely, 100% agree, and, any child we bring, and my point to this is simply looking at the numbers. If we do this, any child who comes in gets the quality of education that every child has here, and whatever the needs are, we provide.
So for the committee's benefit, the circuit breaker gets paid quarterly right now. It's about $1 million for the district. So that's about a $250,000 payment. That fourth quarter payment comes in July. So it's a situation where we are able to show the city that the funding is going to be received. They allow us to expend it, in June as needed to address that year's tuitions, and I'm sure the same would hold true for these reimbursements.
Okay, so it would be, on a regular basis that this funding would come through. Okay.
Mr. Storrs?
So, along the lines of what was just spoken, one of the concerns I can see, it may not happen often, but once in a while there's situations, especially at the high school, where there's a limited number of seats, if you will, in a certain class, whether it's an elective or what have you. And we don't have the right, once we accept the students, they're our student, we have to treat them like any other student, whether they're from Attleboro or not. Always, I'm gonna wanna give the Attleboro students, the preference, because that's our job, is to represent the students and the citizens of Attleboro, not of Taunton, North Attleboro, or wherever. But ultimately, once we accept that student, we can't differentiate in any way, shape, or form, meaning there will be times where a non-Attleboro student will actually take something away, for lack of a better term, from an Attleboro student. Not saying it's gonna happen all the time, not gonna say it's gonna happen often, I'm just saying there's a possibility of something of that happening. So that's just one for the con column, meaning, we can't differentiate once the city's done.
Mrs. Sawyer?
Well,
being on the tight, excuse me, being the tight budget that we are in a predicament, I for one do not feel like we should play this shell game with the Attleboro students and the taxpayers and take the chance of potentially getting a special ed student or not. There's just too many unknowns.
Mrs. Scales.
Can we let Mrs. Regan finish her presentation first? And then maybe she would answer some of our concerns.
Thank you, Mrs. Scales. So how does this all work? There's a specific timeline in place and logistics that we would need to put into place as well. So thinking about our enrollment, we would be able to determine specific grade levels and the number of seats within each grade level that we would have space available. As you did tonight, you would have a public hearing and then a vote as to whether or not you feel that school choice is something that Attleboro should participate in. Once we know that you would like to participate, if that is the case, then we would need to advertise for that and let other communities in the area know that we are now a school choice district and have certain number of seats and grade levels available in each grade level. Once we receive all of the applications, then that's when a blind lottery would in fact happen, and then we would place the students into those classes. The student remains with us until graduation or until they leave on their own for whatever reason that may be. And transportation is not provided unless otherwise indicated in the child's IEP.
Mr. Domenici?
So a quick question, if we chose to do this and then a few years later said, I don't think it's the right approach for us, our students grandfathered in under the provisions. So it's capped, you got in, we're no longer doing it, but these folks can stay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Geddes?
And again, for clarification, because we, I think it was 2 years ago, we had a more in-depth conversation about school choice, specifically related to CTE programs, because there are students in communities that are close to us that are going to Tri-County for programs that we offer. There's no way, although we can specify number of seats in a grade, we cannot specify CTE programs. So, because in that case, it would make sense. We've already got the teacher. We can take that money and put it towards teachers elsewhere. But that's not an option for us.
Mr. Johnson?
A question I have about where the child, or where the students would be placed. So we currently have Attleboro students that maybe they're allotted to go to one elementary school, but they prefer to go to another, and then we move them. They apply, and if there's space, they get to move to the school that they choose to within the district. With the students that would come in through school choice, once they are assigned to a specific building, would they stay in that building, or would it be along the same lines of how the seats, what seats are available, and how would that work, or is that something that we would need to kind of hammer out?
So as we try to do with our Attleboro students right now, we try to keep them in the same school because they establish relationships, they have relationships with teachers, they have relationships with friends, and we want to make sure that we provide that for them, just as we do for our Attleboro students. So we would try as much as we possibly could to keep them in that same school and with the friends that they've made.
Thank you.
Mr. Geddes?
So, to go off of Mrs. Johnson's question, if we say we've got this many seats in second grade, and we bring in a student from Rehoboth, naturally the idea may be that they would go to Hyman Fine because that's the closest school to Rehoboth. But if in that grade the classes are full at Hyman Fine, are we still putting that, or could that student, although Hyman Fine would be closer, can we put that second grade student into Thatcher because that's the next closest school? So how does that all work?
I don't know if we would take into consideration geography of where the child lives. It would be there are 3 spots available at Hyman Fine. There are 3 spots available at Hill Roberts. There's 1 spot available at Thatcher, 1 spot at Willett, and then the students would then be placed.
And as a follow-up to that, would we be allowed to bring in school choice students from Rhode Island?
You don't get reimbursed.
And I'll talk from having done that in Seekonk. It would be a tuition service, and I would strongly not even put that on the table, because then it's like the parent has to pay. We got into a situation where we were chasing payments. That's not something. This comes right from the state, so it's nice, it's clean, it's smooth.
School choice is a state of Massachusetts program, so
Right.
it's not open to Rhode Island residents.
That's
to provide.
That's more what I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mr.
Thank you.
Larson?
I had a question. Somebody said something about CTE before. If we have a child that we were to bring in on school choice, we have them through graduation. So inevitably there could be a they will go through 9th grade. 9th grade, they all go through exploratory. Would they not be eligible for
They would be
CTE, or they
eligible.
would be eligible?
Would be.
Okay, I wasn't sure what I was.
We just wouldn't be able to limit it to CTE programs.
No, but I guess my concern is if we're bringing somebody up through the district and, I mean, legitimately, they could be looking to come here eventually to get into the CTE program. I just wanted clarification on that, that's all.
Mr. Storrs?
I believe I had a conversation with you about this a couple weeks ago. Would we be able to classify our CTE program as a school within the school type situation? I know that would actually possibly make it where we could limit to that school. Is that something that could fall within legal guidelines for this?
From the academic perspective, I don't know. I don't know how that would work, but I can't answer that.
So it's something we could actually look into.
Mrs. Sawyer?
I think Mr. Sawyer might have had an answer.
I was gonna say, when we did look into this, although I can't say that we got a definitive answer, so we certainly could look again, we were left with the impression that that was not gonna work out.
Mrs. Sawyer?
I'm not sure if it was Parker or Superintendent Regan who said if it's not in the if it's in the IEP, we would have to provide transportation.
Correct.
So that would be an additional cost to the city if we had to provide transportation.
So we don't have to pay for the transportation. So if there's specialized transportation in the IEP, the sending district would be responsible
pay
to
for it.
fund it.
Okay.
Correct.
Mr. Quinn?
Offhand, and this is maybe an added benefit, would that, if a school choice student happened to enroll in a CTE program, would that count towards our Chapter 74 funding as well? Enrollment?
I believe we get that premium. It's a premium over the 5,000 or this, the foundation budget for it per student.
So it would be potential extra couple thousand?
Four, I believe it is.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Mrs. Storrs?
Thank you. In researching this, it said that the receiving district actually gets to make the choice on the tuition cost, or the cost per student. Is the 5,000 a maximum cap, or is that
Yes.
just something where, okay, so that's a cap.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Mrs. Sawyer?
So if the 5,000's a maximum cap, where would that extra 4,000 come in? Would that come in from the state if they went into the CTE program?
We would identify the student as CTE, and yes, I believe, like with special education services, those additional services get reimbursed.
From the.
But again, it's not what we receive per student. We receive $16,000 per CTE student. That would be just a premium over 5, so 9 or 8 or 9.
And would the district that's paying for it, could they say opt out that they don't wanna pay more than the $5,000?
On special education, no.
No, I'm talking like the CTE, he's saying that.
I'd have to look into that. I don't think so. I think that if they're receiving the benefit, they would pay the.
Well, with CTE, there's the sending district's paying the 5 and the state's covering the rest, correct?
I'd have to look at that.
And just to be clear, the 5 comes out of their Chapter 70, so it's not the sending district sending from their operating budget. It
Yeah,
comes
we're
from-
not billing them, no.
They're not billing them, and they're not paying for them. It just comes out of their Chapter 70.
Well,
allotment.
again, it's the municipal component, and the way we would receive it, it comes in through the monthly local aid payments to the city.
Mhm.
So there'd be a process to release those funds from the general fund to us.
And I'm sorry, I like to make sure I get the
Sure.
numbers right. When you talk about the premium, so it's about $4,000 per student
for CTE.
For CTE, greater than what we get, Chapter 70 in city.
Correct.
Right.
For our
So if, just to put the numbers in place, if it were $10,000 per student in normal academic program, but a CTE student gets 14, that extra difference of $4,000 would come in from the state Chapter 74 funding. Whereas an
believe so.
Attleboro student would get we'd get the full,
right,
the full amount. So it wouldn't come from, I don't think it would come from a sending district. It would actually be additional state funds that would find its way to us through Chapter 74.
Well, again, all of the accounting is done at the municipal level, so through additions and deducts from local aid. So, again, specifically for CTE, I will talk to Rob tomorrow and form the committee.
For those students we have that go to Tri-County or Bristol Aggie, we're paying the full, the full benefit of the Chapter 74 funds goes to, does it work the same way? They get
No,
the premium,
th-
we get a
those
portion
two-
and they get the premium?
Yeah,
or-
those two actually work in two different ways. Bristol Aggie owns the student, so they get the state funding for a CTE student at Bristol Aggie. Tri-County is a tuition agreement that is based on our reimbursement for CTE students, so they get what we.
So it'd be similar to what
pass
we.
through from us to them.
All right, so that would be more how it would work here for us.
Again, I'm
If
gonna have to.
we think.
Yeah.
It's a possibility. Okay.
Mr. Storrs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the things I'm thinking about with this is it's a compounding thing. So if in year one we have enough to bring in 20 students, and then year two another 20 students, over time it starts to compound, and the place where it all comes together and it all becomes a possible concern would be at the high school level. I know with our new high school, the state only reimbursed. They were very specific on how big we can make the building, how many classrooms. All that was based on student population, correct?
Right.
How many students are in the high school right now? 1,800, 7?
It's a little under 1,700.
1,700. And the new high school, can you refresh my memory on?
1,725.
Right, so effectively net.
Although that's 85% utilization. But another factor in all of this is that it doesn't quite capture how our CTE spaces are utilized. So if we built a better schedule, which the high school is in the process of trying to design, that allows us to make better use of our CTE shops, you conceivably could be opening up quite a bit more capacity.
So, I mean, the reason I bring it up is, look, I know that our student population has been going up over time, and that's going to probably continue over time. It's a little bit, I believe.
Very marginally. I mean, it's
maybe
6,000 every year. Just you can
give or
almost
take,
go to the bank.
a couple hundred, yeah. But the point is, we start adding in 10 students every year, 20 students every year, kind of thing, over a certain time frame. The next thing you know, you get an extra couple hundred students at the high school or so. So it's just another thing to think about as well. I'm bringing it up for.
Yeah, it requires planning and projections on enrollment and all the things you're talking about. Again, we wouldn't offer seats if they weren't there.
But once they're in, they're in.
And once they're in, they're in. So again, you have to always forward plan and project and make sure that you're okay. Yeah.
And just to echo what Mr. Sawyer said, the 1725 number is a little bit of a misnomer, because at 85% occupancy, which we're above probably in this building, even if we're not, but at 85%, that would be 2,000 at 100% essentially.
Yeah.
10
there's
students
some
off.
room. Yeah.
Mr. Quinn, then Mr. Demanchy?
Yeah, I think I can understand your concern, Mr. Storrs. I think one thing I would just mention, particularly for the high school, is that strategically a lot of districts only offer, you know, 1 or 2 entry points. So they come in at grade 5, they come in grade 9. So you'd only allow up to, let's say, 10 seats a year coming in. That's at most. And then when you're cycling in, graduating out students, 40 students if you were just adding those 10 on top, which is an extra $200,000 for the building to utilize as they see fit. Or more if they're, you know, a CTE student.
Mr. Demancia?
Sorry, I just had just one point. I'll have to pull it up again. At one point in time, I had went back into DESE and started looking at the numbers for enrollment, because obviously with Foxborough Charter, it's chunked away. At one point in time, we had like a high watermark of about 7,000 students. Now, the obvious factor that goes along with that number of students is the number of teachers exponentially that can support it. So at $5,000 a student, you're essentially looking at 10 students potentially brings you a new teacher, which can then maybe free up multiple classes. So there is a little bit of math involved in it, but the numbers would have to be such where we could maintain pace of having the right teacher count to be able to handle the enrollment of potential enrollment increases. And I'm being an optimist and assuming we would get an enrollment increase. That's where a lot of the math really has to come into play. You know, how many teachers does it add? Does it add them in the right areas? Does it help? You know, because I think from us across the district with the 9 buildings, like, we have physical capacity to have a larger number than we do. If all things were equal, though, we'd have the appropriate number of teachers, and that's, you know, that's where I go with that. So at one point in time, we had a larger population.
Mr. Storrs?
So one last one is, let's say we got to the point where we were bringing in extra $100,000 from out of the district. Could that 100,000 be applied by the city to somehow or another offset net school spending? We just went through the whole budget. We're having problems. I would just hate to see a situation where we go through all this, we make this decision, we go through all the planning to make this, and somehow or another, because we brought it in, come the following year, it's taken away.
Well, again, I think that's what, when I say that it's the municipal accounting, so right now, just to throw numbers out, you know, we're $500,000 going to Norton and Fall River and Taunton. I believe that that $500,000 gets turned into $400,000 if we have $100,000 worth of students here. So that automatically increases our net school spending by $100,000.
So bottom line, there's no way that the city could
avoid it.
No, right, so effectively hold
It
that against
reduces
us
their credit,
and
yeah.
deny us that money in the subsequent year. That's what I wanted, yeah.
Mrs. Regan?
Okay, so, should we do this in Attleboro? Our recommendation is to pursue school choice in 2021. Our reasons for that is because, as we spoke about earlier today, it is a blind lottery, and we want to be able to be prepared for all students that would be able to attend the Attleboro Public Schools. We feel also that the opportunity to promote that we are a school choice district is late, and we want to be able to do that successfully so that we could have as many students as possible be a part of the application process, and then hopefully at some point have a waiting list that we could pull from. And the other piece to this is that I feel like we want to be thoughtful and create guidelines and systems and processes so that this system, if we do in fact want to have a school choice system in Attleboro, is clearly and thoughtfully presented. You know, it's not the first time that we've tried to, or that we have built the plane while flying, and I'm sure we could do it again if that's what you decided, but I think this is one that requires a little bit more time.
Mr. Gaddis?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was gonna wait till your next slide. Go ahead. Sorry.
So our proposed timeline for next year is to present you with a proposal again, with specific grade levels and seats for in January of 2020, and then hopefully have a public hearing in March of 2020, and then start to begin our process by promoting and marketing that we are a school choice district, receive applications, complete the lottery, place our students, hopefully meet with some of the families as they are introduced to the Attleboro Public Schools and welcome them officially, and get that waiting list ready to go.
Mr. Geddes.
So thank you for putting this presentation together and for your patience as we as we've discussed it prematurely with our questions and concerns. This is a significant gamble for us, because to Mr. Domenici's point, we bring in 10 or 11 students. They then pay for a teacher that we can put in front of 25 students, and it grows from there. 20 students, now we've got teachers for 50, and so on and so forth. But to Mrs. Sawyer's point earlier, the potential special education costs are significant to consider as well. It is a big decision to make, I guess, for based on what you just said for the last slide, where we are expected to make a motion and take a vote tonight. That would be for 2020, or to allow you to pursue it for 2021?
No, what we'll be voting on, what we need to vote on tonight is whether or not to participate or not participate for fiscal year 19-20.
Thank you. Just wanted to clarify.
So, the recommendation was that we pursue it in 2021, which means that the recommendation is that we not participate in 19-20.
There would be a no tonight.
Mr. Quinn?
Again, to echo Mr. Geddes' point, I think there's a lot of time and thought that went into this. I end up with a different conclusion. I think that where we have excess capacity in some of our classes, where the marginal cost to educate students, and particularly, even if it is a student with special needs, I think we've got to be really careful not to come across, and I don't think it's intentional, as disparaging against kids who have special needs, particularly when the state would be supporting that. I think, especially in light of the previous conversation where we're starting off with a $500,000 deficit, I think if there are spots where there is excess capacity, that I believe in it as a standalone, but we almost have a fiduciary responsibility to pursue, why not one seat, right? Why not 2 seats? We can limit the number of seats that we're offering, particularly as we build a waiting list. I think that there's a way to do it smartly by just, let's get the pieces in place. Let's try it. Let's use this as the pilot program with a small number of seats. There are 189 districts that we can draw from to put those guidelines together. I think that we're in a position where even if you're on the fence, given the deficits that we're looking at potentially, this is a one way to alleviate, so we're not, blowing a hole in that ship.
Mr. Geddes?
Sorry, I meant to ask a question as well. Is there, have we gotten any indication from families outside of Attleboro that they would be interested in coming to Attleboro Public Schools? Like, do we have any data to support the idea that we would get however many students from other towns, or?
I think the evidence is anecdotal.
Thank you.
Mr. Storrs?
First of all, thank you for all the effort you put into this. I do look forward, over the coming months and into next year in, seeing how many students you're looking at doing, what grade levels you're looking at doing, maybe getting a definitive answer on the school within a school CTE possibility, things of that nature. But to take away Mr. Withers' thunder, just to get the ball rolling, I'll make a motion that the Attleboro Public Schools will not participate in the school choice program for the 2019-2020 school year.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
It's an improper motion.
Why would it be? I can make a motion whenever I want.
Because the ruling or the law is to opt out of school choice.
I just said that. Will not.
So the wording would have to be
Opt out.
opt out.
Okay. I was using the wording that was on the minutes. If you look at the agenda.
No, I just.
So you want me to use, instead of will not, you want me to use opt out?
Yes.
I will use opt out. So I will since it wasn't seconded yet, for the Attleboro Public Schools to opt out of the school choice program for the 2019-2020 school year.
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Domenici, sorry.
Oh, Mr. Storrs jumped a motion, I was still, just wanted to put a point home, and I'm in agreement.
Once it goes to discussion, you can discuss.
Well, I'm discussing, it might be a little different. I have a colleague on the Norton School Committee who has reminded me many times of how great school choice option has worked for Norton. I think bringing in somewhere around $600,000 of additional revenue a year, and that's a small school department. So they're, and then we've gone from 32 to 189, so six-fold over a 27-year period, and a lot more, to Mr. Quinn's point, a lot more towns and cities are rolling the dice on looking for options to help with their funding issues. So it's something to keep in mind. I do personally, since we have the motion open, support the idea of giving ourselves some time to really think it through and come up with, a proper plan in place for how we're going to execute on it. But nothing is shying me away from the idea of looking at this for, the next possible fiscal year after this one. That's my
Any
comments.
further comments? All right, so the motion is to opt out for 2019-2020, so a yes vote will mean we do opt out, meaning we do not participate in school choice. Mrs. Sawyer?
Yes.
Mr. Geddes?
Yes.
Mrs. Johnson?
No.
Mrs. Scales?
No.
Mr. Withers, no. Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Mr. Quinn?
No.
Mr. Domenici?
No.
So five noes, 4 yeses. So, by virtue of the vote, the committee opted into school choice for fiscal year 1920. I will echo Mr. Quinn's and a lot of people's comments that understand and appreciate the amount of work that will go into implementing this for the next year. I have confidence that you guys can do it, and I think, in doing it next year, we can pilot in a way that understanding it's to get it off the ground and move forward, so that can grow it over the coming years. But thank you.
My apologies, Mr. Chairman. Would you give me that roll call one more time? I wasn't quite ready to write down all those yeses and nos. I had Mrs. Sawyer as yes. Mr. Geddes?
I was a yes.
You're a yes. Shannon? Laurie?
No.
Steve?
No.
I was yes.
Yes. No.
Dave?
No.
Scott?
I'm a no.
So that means we're doing it.
Correct.
5-4.
Get promoting.
I think that's our first 5-4 vote. All right. Anything further in your report, Mr. Sawyer?
That concludes my brief report.
That was your brief presentation.
That it?
All right, next on the business agenda is the Bi-County Collaborative. As we do each year, we have a motion to appoint Superintendent Sawyer as the Bi-County Collaborative representative of the Attleboro Public School District for the 2019-2020 year. Do we have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Proposed out-of-district survey, Mr. Geddes.
So we took some changes to the survey, that feedback that I got when I had shared it with the committee. When those changes were implemented to the survey, it caused a lot of issues with the survey. Jonathan Plurd, the district's IT director, has been working with SurveyMonkey to resolve those issues. So we're not prepared to present a final draft of the survey for tonight. Essentially, the goal was to reorder the listing of reasons why students are going out of district. During our subcommittee meeting 2 weeks ago, Mr. Quinn pointed out, and Ms. Regan also mentioned that it's a lot of our out-of-district students are at the elementary or middle school level, and most of the reasons at the top of that list of options were related to the high school level. In making some of those changes, it has disrupted how the survey functions. So we may not be able to make all of the changes that we wanted to, or like I said, we're waiting to hear more from IT. So if we can actually make a motion to table that discussion until our next meeting, that would be great. So I'll make a motion to table the out-of-district survey discussion until our May 20th meeting.
So, second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Geddes, and thank you for your continued work on that.
Thank you, Ms. Regan, for partnering with, and Mr. Blurd for all of the behind-the-scenes stuff, all the headaches I'm causing him.
Next, we have our minutes from our April 22nd, 2019 meeting. The draft minutes were circulated with your packets. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Consent agenda tonight, motion to approve a day field trip proposal for Brennan Middle School grade 8 students to travel to High Meadows in Granby, Connecticut on June 6, 2019.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to accept a donation in the amount of $190 from Men's Warehouse to the Attleboro High School Gifts and Donations line.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to accept a donation in the amount of $100 from Park Street Ale House Restaurant to the Attleboro High School Gifts and Donation line.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to accept a donation in the amount of $129.20 from Bristol Community College to the AHS Guidance Department.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to accept a donation in the amount of $301.11 from Custom Inc. LLC to the District Music Revolving Account.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That concludes our consent agenda. Subcommittee.
I'm sorry, just a
Mrs.
quick
Gilson.
question. In our packet was included the field trip proposal for Coelho, but we just approved Brennan. Kind of late in me noticing that, but is it really for Brennan? This says Coelho.
That's the one that it is, Lori. It's Coelho.
It's Coelho, not Brennan.
Motion to
I make a motion to amend, the, day field trip for Coelho Middle School and not Brennan.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We have a motion to approve a day field trip proposal for Coelho Middle School grade 8 students to travel to High Meadows and Granby, Connecticut on June 6, 2019.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Scales. Subcommittee report, Finance and Budget, Mr. Larson.
The Finance and Budget Subcommittee met on May 2nd. Mr. Furtado took us through the financials. It is going to be a very, very tight ending to the school year. The substitute lines continue to be a concern because we're getting into that time of year when we tend to go through a fair amount on those lines. The district utilities, we were hoping to have some savings there, but we don't see those coming to fruition because of the different seasons that we've had. We had a discussion about the carryover funds coming back from the city, and also there's encumbered funds for purchase orders that we had open at the end of last year that have been purged. So we had a discussion about those two sets of funds coming back from the city to help us close our year. They are in the process, we've been told at this point. Mr. Furtado reminded the committee that supplies and non-personnel expenses have been frozen at this time until we get through the end of the year. Just as a highlight to next month, anybody who would like to attend the meeting, we will be having a discussion about school lunch prices. It's always a fun discussion to have, something to look forward to next month. And with that, we also have a number of, going along with school lunch prices, we're still struggling with a fair amount of negative balances in students' lunches accounts. So if anyone has one of those, if they could take care of that in the next few weeks, that would be great. There's some suggestions from DESE that have come through that we'll also be reviewing that would limit the amount of charging that a student can do from a policy point of view. So that's something that both we and I'm assuming the policies subcommittee will be at least reading up on in the next few months to see if it's something we want to look at. We have a number of housekeeping motions this evening that came from our discussions. Most of these are all programs that we have in place and contracts that we just need to extend. So the first one is to authorize the finance director to process any budget transfers to meet the financial obligations of the district to close out the FY19 budget.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. The next one is a motion to renew the licensing agreement with Abacus for the FY20 school year.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Motion to approve the licensing agreement with the Smarts Collaborative for the FY20 school year.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Motion to approve the third year of a contract for physical therapy through Houghton Physical Therapy and Sports Conditioning for the FY20 school year.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
I have one question.
Yes.
This was a 3-year contract, right?
Yes.
So we have to approve the third year of a 3-year contract?
We have to approve
But
the
didn't we-
third year of a 3-year contract.
Wasn't the contract previously approved for all 3 years?
The contract was approved, but it's subject to, funding by the school district. So your approval tonight signals that we have the funding to exercise the contract
We'll find it
for
somewhere.
that year.
Any other discussions? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Motion to approve the third year of the Bloom contract for the FY20 school year.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to approve the second year of the North Turf Inc. contract for the FY20 school year.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Motion to approve the second year of the North Turf Inc. Bid Alternative 1 agreement for FY20 school year.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Mr. Chairman, that's the end of my report.
Thank you, Mrs. Gales.
Sorry, I'm just a little slow tonight. So, Abacus, the contract should be provide a desired space at,
Denver.
that's not what it says, so,
I know,
Okay.
those printed contracts have to be
Okay.
changed.
All right, next on the agenda, open forum. Is there anyone who would like to address the committee at open forum? I see no one, so I'll close open forum. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Besides being 200.
Yeah, second one is assuming that we do the first one.